Chapter 1363. After figuring out this point, everyone's expression became much better. Everyone had a deeper understanding of Yang Qindong's strategy. Garcia was probably still secretly happy at this moment, but if he knew that what he got was what Yang Xie wanted to give him, and that he had successfully misled them, it would be too late for him to cry. Immediately secretly arrest Anthony and learn more about the situation on the other side of Spain from his mouth. At the same time, arrange for people to learn the Western language so that it will be easier to manage them in the future. Yang Qindong saw that the matter was settled, so he made a final conclusion. After saying this, he looked at Director Che Chao of the Security Bureau and nodded approvingly. This time, the Security Bureau reacted very quickly, which is worthy of praise. I will record this merit. I also hope that you can continue to work hard and find more problems hidden in the dark. Che Chao, who was praised, was very excited. He immediately stood at attention and gave a standard military salute. Please rest assured, Sixth Young Master, our Security Bureau will work hard and strive for new achievements. The matter of the Spanish merchants was over. Not long after, Anthony was arrested. After the Security Bureau used certain means, he lowered his noble head and was willing to tell everything he knew. Not only that, the Security Bureau, with the help of the Navy, began to secretly arrest some other foreign sea merchants who came to Resin City. From their mouths, more and more navigation maps fell into the hands of the Navy headquarters, making full preparations for the battle at sea in March. Yang Qindong was still constantly monitoring and guiding the work of Resin City, guiding Yang Xie's development with some of the vision and ideas of the future generation. At night, he was busy in the palace. Now he only has a son and a daughter. In the future, the huge family business will obviously not be enough for them, so he needs to work harder. Fortunately, Yang Qindong has the strength of a grandmaster. Even if he works hard, it won't hurt the foundation of his body. In addition, his wives are very cooperative, so it's only a matter of time before results are produced. On the grassland battlefield, although Yang Qindong was no longer there, the troops left there were still seriously carrying out the strategy of besieging the city. The results were also very obvious. If it wasn't for the arrival of winter and the heavy snow, the entire Ili inner district would have been under Yang Xie's control. Southern Ming Dynasty, Department of Aristocrats. Zhu Huichen's expression was a little unsightly. Zhu Huitu, who betrayed his elder brother and younger brother and became the king of 3 provinces from King Guangdong, finally realized that he had been fooled by Zhu Qizhen after more than 2 years. If he had to say who he hated more between foreign enemies and traitors, it would definitely be the latter. Towards those who had no ancestors and no sense of nationality, once he made a move, he would not be lenient. A telegram was an order. Very quickly, Yang Xie's envoy received the order and went to meet the king of the 3 provinces on the same day. No one knew how the discussion went, but in short, the Bengal army quickly retreated from the border of the southern Ming, allowing the people there to have a chance to breathe. The 5-star army had already agreed to double the population and goods. Shiping's King Mubin could not stand the pressure of Zhu Huichen's army and gave out some food and money. On the surface, it seemed that Zhu Huichen's danger of raising an army was temporarily resolved. However, he was not happy at all. It was not for any other reason, but because the attitude of the emissary sent by Yang Qindong was very bad and very threatening. What kind of person was Zhu Huichen? For glory, wealth, and power, he was even willing to send his own brothers to the guillotine, and was willing to betray them. How could such a person be willing to be threatened by others? Therefore, even though he agreed to Yang Qindong's request to not let foreign countries oppress the Han people, in fact, he had already done so. However, after the envoy left, he smashed a few sets of porcelain bowls, one of which was expensive, his favorite tea set. He's going too far, he's going too far. We're all kings. Why did he do this? Why did he do this? Zhu Huiqin was so angry that he cursed in the main hall. The maids and servants at the side did not dare to breathe too loudly. After smashing the bowls, his anger finally subsided. Then Zhu Huiqin dove into his bedroom and went to sleep. He slept until the sky turned dark and only woke up after shouting for someone. The person who appeared in front of him was actually Chen Tian. Looking at his most trusted think tank, Zhu Huiqin finally didn't show his displeasure. Instead, he gave a wry smile and said, "Why are you here, sir? Did some reckless servant go to invite you? Alas, these people are really ignorant." "No, no." Chen Tian hurriedly waved his hand. Although when Zhu Huiqin was angry in the past, the servants had no choice but to invite him twice. This time he was not invited, but uninvited. "Your Majesty, there is a very confidential matter to discuss with you." After a quarter of an hour, a neatly dressed Zhu Huiqin appeared in the secret room. Opposite the candlelight was a very ordinary-looking man of about 30 years old. If he were to be thrown into the streets, no one would be able to recognize him the moment he turned his head. However, when such a person saw Zhu Huiqin, he did not show the slightest bit of nervousness. Just this boldness alone was enough to prove that he was not an ordinary person. "Who are you?" Zhu Huiqin was displeased. If this person had not been introduced by Chen Tian, he was afraid that he would have been angry and punished. "This humble one greets your highness, the third province king." The person was not angry or panicked. He first bowed, and then opened his right hand, handing over a banknote worth 10,000 taels with both hands. Although a banknote worth 10,000 taels was not much, at least it made Zhu Huiqin's expression look a little better. Of course, it was only 10,000 taels of silver. It was not worth it for Zhu Huiqin to reach out and accept it. He just looked at the person curiously. One should not accept a reward without doing anything. Before he knew the purpose of this person's visit, he would not casually accept the money. The newcomer seemed to have thought of this long ago. He just grinned and revealed a simple and honest smile. If it wasn't for his previous calm and composed performance, he would have given off the impression that he was an honest farmer. "This humble one is Mo Gui. I am here to clear your doubts." "Mo Gui? Clear my doubts? What doubts does this prince have?" Zhu Huiqin chuckled, and there was a hint of horror in his laughter. Mo Gui, who was not affected by Zhu Huiqin's laughter, spoke up. "Your Highness, you have great ambitions. It is a pity that He Shengdong and Bugnam of Gojoseon's appearance overshadowed your glory. If you want to achieve great things, you have to get rid of Yang Xie first. Now, there is an opportunity in front of you. I wonder if you are willing to seize it." Zhu Huiqin naturally knew what He Shengdong meant. He had just been warned by Yang Shengdong and was furious. Mo Gui had appeared. He had to admit that he had chosen the right time. But did he really think he was stupid? Before he could figure out the other party's background, he would not say anything that was on his mind or speak the truth. "Ha ha ha!" Zhu Huiqin just laughed and did not make any comments. Mo Gui still did not care about this. Instead, he put the banknote worth 10,000 taels of silver on the table and said, "If there is an opportunity to get rid of Bugnam of Gojoseon, would you be willing to do it? Of course, before that, you don't need to do anything. If Bugnam of Gojoseon is really in trouble one day, you only need to move your fingers and hit him when he is down. Your Highness does not need to answer this humble one's question. If there is an opportunity, you can decide whether to do it or not. If there is no opportunity, you can just bide your time. This 10,000 taels of silver is my master's sincerity. At least it shows that I am not a person who likes to talk nonsense. Okay, if there is an opportunity, We will meet again. Chapter 1364. Before Zhu Huichun could give an explanation, Mo Gui had already turned and walked out of the secret room. Zhu Huiyan didn't stop him. Why would he stop him? He didn't do anything, and gave him 10,000 taels of silver. Even if he was crazy, Zhu Huiyan still liked him. If he could meet dozens of crazy people like him in a day, would he stop? Of course. Zhu Huiyan didn't think Mo Gui was crazy. Since he said so, something might happen. What he needed to think now was what to do when the opportunity presented itself. Chen Tian brought him here, so Zhu Huiyan naturally wanted to hear his thoughts. Minister Chen, what do you think? Your Highness, let's just pretend that nothing happened and do what we should do after receiving the banknotes. If it really is as this person said, and such a day really comes, it won't be too late for us to plan for the long term. Otherwise, let's pretend we didn't see him. It's not a bad thing to take the money for free. No one would complain about having too much money, although 10,000 taels of silver wasn't much of a problem for Zhu Huiyan, who had 500,000 soldiers. It was free. But after all, he had gotten it for free. Who would complain that it was too little? Zhu Huiyan nodded silently, obviously approving of this decision. But in fact, he was very curious. This Mo Gui was obviously just a messenger. He had a master behind him. Who was this master? If he guessed correctly, the person behind Mo Gui must know him and Yang Chendong very well. How could it be a coincidence that Mo Gui made a move right after Mo Gui threatened him? Interesting. Thinking that there was someone who knew Yang Chendong so well and was secretly watching everything, Zhu Huiyan suddenly became interested. He even began to look forward to that moment. If that day really came, he would definitely make a move. He had long coveted Yangxie, thinking of the countless good things in Yangxie's territory. Once Yang Chendong was in trouble, Yangxie would be like the sky falling. It would definitely be chaotic. When that time came, he would definitely make a move. Countless riches would be waving at him. That day would be his chance to achieve great things. Far Eastern Province. After entering winter, it snowed for 3 days. The thickness of the snow at the highest point was 60 centimeters. This was just the beginning of winter. It could be imagined that there would be more snow like this in the future. Tang Sheng of the 4th Cavalry Division walked out of the tent. When he saw the white snow in front of him, his expression became nervous. He began to worry about whether his tribe had suffered a disaster, whether there were casualties, and whether they had enough food. Tang Sheng wasn't a pure Han. His mother was Han, and his father was Mongol. Back then, the Mongol cavalry raided the fields to raid his mother and gave birth to him. His poor mother died of an illness not long after giving birth to him, leaving only his father and grandfather to depend on each other for survival. When he was a teenager, his father died in a battle over a good piece of pasture between tribes. So he left his hometown with his grandfather and the tribe and came to Siberia. Tang Sheng was good at fighting. In the end, he was noticed by Chen Bo during a battle against the 5-star army and was promoted to the position of division commander. However, it was a pity that the Far Eastern region was based on the Han people. The clans that had killed countless Han people had a grudge against the Far Eastern region. Commander Chen Bo didn't have a good impression of such people. Plus, the space in the city was limited, so it couldn't accommodate so many people. No matter how Tang Sheng tried to persuade him, he wouldn't let them in. Helplessly, he had no choice but to use his authority to find a place for them to stay in between the Far Eastern Prefecture and the West Siberian Prefecture. From time to time, he would send people to greet them and bring some food and other necessities. With the snow, the roads were blocked, and Tang Sheng began to worry. However, he had a duty and could not move without a military order. In addition, the The snow had blocked the road. Even if he sent out his trusted aides, they would not be able to get results immediately. This made him feel uneasy, as if ants were crawling in his heart. Give the order to clear the snow and check the situation. If the people are in trouble, open the granaries and release food. Tang Sheng gave the order to a messenger behind him. At this moment, Tang Sheng was displaying the authority of a division commander. After 5 days, the snow was cleared and a batch of food was released. So the people around the 4th Cavalry Division didn't have to worry about food. However, as a division commander, Tang Sheng's face was still filled with worry. The people of the far eastern province had the help of the Yuan province army, so normal disasters couldn't do anything to them. But what about his tribe? Would they be able to pull through? On the 6th day, a tribesman whom Tang Sheng had been looking forward to suddenly appeared outside the big tent. Tang Sheng was excited, but at the same time, his face darkened. This was because he realized that the tribesman named Herrick had tears streaming down his face when he saw him. "Brother Tang, our tribe has been surrounded by Akmo. You have to save them." The winter in Crimson City was no different from usual. In this half-modern city, there were all kinds of strategies to deal with anything. Even if there was a tsunami, there were ways to deal with it. Not to mention, there was very little snow in Crimson City in winter, and most of the time, there was no snow. It was already January 1461. Under Yang Qindong's constant efforts, the 6th Madame Luan Xiaoyu was pregnant. Yang Qindong's face was serious when he mentioned this issue. He knew very well what would happen if the quality of the cement was not up to standard. Repeatedly wasting money was a small matter. If the building really collapsed, who knew how many people would die? The main garment factory, the factory manager, Zhou Hua, accompanied Yang Qindong as he inspected the workshops one by one. Yang Qindong, who had just inspected the underwear factory and the garment factory, had a satisfied expression on his face. The style of the garment can be more varied, and it must satisfy more people's tastes. Yes, Zhou Hua looked at her son-in-law with a satisfied expression. If it wasn't for Yang Qindong's arrival, her family would probably still be living a hard life. As they spoke, they arrived at the military uniform factory. Looking at the green, white, and blue military uniforms that were packaged, Yang Qindong exhaled and said, "The material of the military uniform must be of good quality, warm in winter and cool in summer. Especially the winter clothes. The cotton inside must be of the best quality. We can't let any soldiers catch a cold or get hurt because of the military uniform." "Sixth young master, please don't worry. All the clothes produced have to go through 3 inspection procedures. They don't know each other. We have also set up a reward system. Whoever finds a problem will be rewarded. If the problem is not found, they will be punished. This greatly increases their enthusiasm, so there won't be any problems." When speaking of this, Zhou Hua was full of confidence. These ideas were given by her son, Luan Xiaochen, and daughter, Luan Xiaoyu. How could they be wrong? Okay. By the way, mother-in-law, if you have time, you should go to the palace to see Xiaoyu. She is now pregnant, so she is a little nervous. You should go and comfort her. After talking about official matters, the mother-in-law and son-in-law started chatting. Chapter 1365. Shipyard. Accompanied by the shipyard director Hong Yi, Qin Chuan inspected the newly produced warships. The 5-star Army Navy was currently using sailboats. Division-level warships were using Level 4 warships, regiment-level warships were using Level 3 warships, and so on and so forth. After years of hard work, they had finally built a Level 5 warship. The size of the ship and the number of cannons made it the warship used by the officers. We still need to build more warships like this. If there's any need, the other departments will fully cooperate and strive to upgrade all the warships. looking at the ship that was over 100 meters long, Yang Qindong sighed. Yes, the Navy headquarters also has such a request. In the future, all division-level warships will be upgraded to Level 5 warships. In the future, we will focus on researching Level 6 and 7 warships. Hong Yi said with a face full of excitement. No, there's no need to worry about Level 6 and 7 warships. Right now, the research department is researching steam engines. Once that thing is built, it will be used on Level 6 warships. At that time, the speed will be dozens of times faster than now. Yang Qindong sighed and said, Paper factory. Factory Director Kong and led Yang Qindong to inspect many workshops. Looking at the white paper being produced from the production line, Yang Qindong walked forward and took 2 pages. He found that the paper was very sturdy and thick. Very good. In the future, Yang Xie's children will have to go to school. This will require a lot of paper. You will have to work hard. Yes, Kong nodded. We will definitely work hard. After spring, we will build more production lines. There won't be any delays. There must be no delays. Education is the foundation of the country. Only when the people have culture and wisdom can the country become stronger. This is the national policy, and no one can change it, much less neglect it. Glass factory, a year's GDP, and wealth had reached a certain ratio. It had become one of the important sources of Yang Xie's wealth. As the factory director, Ming had his own pride. However, when he faced Yang Qindong, that bit of pride had long disappeared because everything in front of him was created by this person. Glass was not a big deal in Yang Xie. It was even used in ordinary households. For example, the windows of many residential buildings were made of transparent glass. But to the Yang family, this was still a novelty, especially the various accessories made of glass. Businessmen from other places would rush to buy them. After creating so much production value and wealth, the head of the glass factory, Ming, would be glowing with happiness wherever he went. The factory's confidentiality measures still need to be strengthened. We can't let others steal the results. If you need anything, you can go directly to Yang Wu. He will make the arrangements. Manager Hong Shi listened attentively, and the secretary beside him was also taking notes with a small notebook. After being in Crimson City for a long time, who didn't know that the 6th young master's words were the golden law? They were absolutely correct. Main food processing factory. Zhou Dea was accompanying Yang Qindong to inspect the food production line. Looking at the bags of instant noodles, ham sausages, and various canned food being packed separately, Yang Qindong also reached out and picked up a bag of instant noodles. After casually opening it and tasting it, he nodded. The taste is not bad. The quantity is also sufficient. Yes, these are all prepared for the army. The quantity is 30% more than what is usually sold. This is to let the soldiers eat until they are full. Zhou Dei stood on the side and said, Just eating until they are full is not enough. You have to think of a way to eat well. The taste has to be varied. You have to consider the taste of the public as much as possible. Yang Qindong stood beside the production line and gave instructions. Air Force Training Ground. The original Eagle Division had been expanded many times. Although the current Air Force could not be compared to the Army and Navy, the number of people had reached tens of thousands. Coupled with their special mission, they had become a new powerful force that could not be ignored. The Navy Commander Tian, you had the rank of Major General. Wearing a sky blue uniform, he was accompanying Yang Qindong and watching the performance of the Navy soldiers. Dozens of hot air balloons rose into the air, carrying out the various orders given by the ground command. Time and space were sometimes low, sometimes left, sometimes right. After reaching the predetermined position, Packs of high explosives fell from the sky, blowing up the original targets one after another. Individual paragliders rose into the air. Using the large or behind them that rotated like a fan, one soldier after another rose into the air. They could follow orders to the west or to the west to complete the high-altitude reconnaissance mission. The development of the Air Force started from scratch, and it was not easy to reach the scale it had now. In this regard, Yang Qindong affirmed their work and also made a request. He also agreed to the request of Tianyu to lead the soldiers to participate in actual combat. From now on, with the addition of the Air Force, any enemy's so-called ambush would have nowhere to hide. They would also become the unique overlord of the sky. Yang Family Academy. The first vice principal Wang Si accompanied Yang Qindong to walk around the entire academy. When Yang Qindong did not return to Qiqian City, Wang Si was actually the first leader of the academy. Under his leadership, the Yang family was constantly developing. It was different from the great Ming dynasty's knowledge, which was mainly based on the 8 classics, the 4 books, the 5 classics, and other sages. The studies in the Yang Family Academy were divided into different categories: Chinese, mathematics, geography, science, biology, physics, chemistry, agriculture, labor, and so on. The scholars of Yangxia had long been used to studying many subjects. This represented the comprehensive development of morality, aspiration, physical fitness, aesthetics, and labor. Only such a talent could have everything. Only learning Confucianism in the Yangxia had no future. So far, the Yang Family Academy had cultivated many talents for the Yangxia. Once the students graduated, those with excellent results would be quickly snatched up by various departments. Because of this, more and more young people liked to apply for the academy. With this repeated cycle, the academy had entered a very normal track. Now, the students of the Yang Family Academy had flooded the various departments, and they all considered themselves as Yang Qindong's students, gradually forming a strong force. One could imagine that after a few years, when this group of people fully matured, they would become a powerful force. Perhaps even the future Huang Pu would not be able to compare. Not only do they have to study, but also have them participate in labor and experience the real life of the common people. Every graduate has to live in an ordinary village for at least a month. This is a hard and fast rule. There are no conditions. Many things can only be said if one truly understands it. If one only reads it from books, not only will it not be deep enough, it will also be easy to be separated from reality. Yang Qindong wanted students who knew what to do, not students who only knew how to talk but not do, or students who only knew how to do but not speak. Yes, this student will remember. Wang Si nodded heavily. Seeing that Wang Si was almost 30 years old, Yang Qindong suddenly stopped and thought of something. Has your grandfather already retired? Wang Si's grandfather was Ming's Minister of Personnel, Wang Ji, who held a high position and power. In the past, he was the person Wang Ji respected the most. He always thought that one day he could be as capable as his grandfather. But ever since he came into contact with Yang Shui, this thought slowly began to waver. Especially after coming to Crimson City, he no longer envied his grandfather. In his opinion, that position was a waste of life. It was just like a machine, going to work and getting off work every day. It was really meaningless. Chapter 1366. Unlike now, where he could come into contact with new knowledge and new things every day in the academy, every time he figured out a problem, regardless of whether it was a teacher or a student, they would all jump up in excitement. A new window would be opened in front of him, and a new field of knowledge would be unlocked. To him, who thirsted for knowledge, this was the most satisfying thing. It was many times better than working in the yamen every day. Wang Si was very satisfied with his current life, but that did not mean that he did not love his grandfather, especially since this grandfather had been very good to him since he was young. Now that he heard Yang Qindong ask, he replied, "Yes, grandfather has already resigned and has returned to his ancestral home to enjoy his old age." Then is it possible to bring him here? You should know that regardless of whether it is the climate or the conditions, this place is much better than the other side. This was the Minister of Personnel, and no one knew the officials of Ming better than him. If such a person was brought to his side, if he could help him, the benefits would be a lot. Of course, Yang Qindong still respected this old man very much. As for the other party, he would not force him before he agreed. Hearing Yang Qindong's suggestion, Wang Si's eyes couldn't help but flicker, but he quickly calmed down. He knew his grandfather too well. If there was something he didn't want to do, no one could force him to do it. Since he didn't know his grandfather's thoughts, he didn't make any promises. Instead, he said honestly, "Teacher, I haven't discussed this matter with my grandfather, but I will write a letter soon to ask for his opinion." Sure, if you have any difficulties, you can also look for City Lord Yuqian and ask him to write a letter as well. After all, we were once colleagues, so we will definitely have more in common. Yang Qindong suggested with a smile, causing Wang Si to nod his head continuously. Following that, the bank, the art troupe, the bicycle factory, the tobacco factory, and so on all left behind Yang Qindong's footprints. With Yang Qindong's guidance, the various units became even more motivated. After receiving encouragement and advanced guidance, the various industries in Crimson City developed a vigorous attitude towards development. 2 months later, in the 3rd month of the year 1461, Yang Qindong personally brought all the officers above the rank of major to the largest square in the city. Here, a stone tablet that was tens of meters tall and a large hall that occupied an extremely large area was located. The monument was a monument to heroes, and the hall was a memorial hall for heroes. The ashes of all the heroes who died on the battlefield were placed here for future generations to pay their respects. It was precisely because these martyrs were not afraid to shed blood and sacrifice that the Yang Xie party was able to grow stronger, and the people were able to live a better life. Anyone with a conscience would never forget these heroes who had sacrificed themselves. On the first day of every month, a large number of officers would come to pay their respects. Even during normal times, there would be people taking turns to come every day. They would either burn paper money or offer flowers to express their gratitude. According to the plan, the Navy would set off from the port and begin their journey of expansion. Yang Qindong brought all the officers here to let them receive a re-education of their thoughts. He wanted them to understand what their mission was and to let them know that compared to the fact that they were still alive, it was already a very fortunate thing. In order for the people of Yang Xie to live a better life, they needed to open up more land and territory. During this process, they had to display the spirit of not being afraid of hardships and not being afraid of death. If they were unfortunate enough to die in battle, their corpses would be transported back here to be worshipped by future generations forever. On the square, hundreds of thousands of people from all walks of life gathered here. They personally witnessed their leader, Yang Qindong, offer a wreath to the martyrs. Following that, all the officers above the rank of major swore, shouting slogans that they were not afraid of death, and made all sorts of promises to the martyrs. On that day, many of the people present cried. On that day, many of the officers present had their eyes wide open. On that day, Yang Qindong knelt in front of the monument and secretly swore in his heart that the martyrs would not die in vain. Yang Xie would one day unify the world. At that time, even more people would come to pay respects to them. At that time, their heroic souls would be forever remembered by future generations. A day later, All the officers above the regiment level who stayed in Chichen City gathered in the Army headquarters auditorium. Yang Chendong personally taught them what the main contradiction was, what the secondary contradiction was, what the unity of thought was, what the united front was, how to build a base, how to fight a land revolution, how to mobilize the power of the people, how to do diplomatic and united front work well. 2 days later, under the personal escort of Yang Chendong, the Marines set off. Deputy Commander Gao Xiong personally led the team. Several naval divisions were ready to set off. Countless warships filled the military port, blowing their horns and raising their white sails as they set off with the wind. Yang Xie's struggle for hegemony on the sea began. 2 days later, Yang Chendong was in the palace accompanying the princess, Hu Yen. A telegram that had just been received was personally delivered to him by Beta Persei. In December, Luan Xiaoyu was pregnant. In January, Xiao Yuxue and Dong Xiangxiang were pregnant. In February, Tuoya and Su Maner were pregnant. In March, Junko and Hu Yen were pregnant. Yang Chendong was like a hard-working little bee, constantly wandering around the harem, using his strength as a grand master to continuously sow seeds. Fortunately, the results were remarkable. Other than the second wife, Qiao Yin, who already had Lele, all the other wives were pregnant. Even Hu Yen, after having Yang Bo and being pregnant with her second child, was as happy as a little girl. Yang Chendong also took more time to accompany her. When the telegram appeared, Yang Chendong's expression did not change, but a trace of doubt flashed through his eyes. If it was not an important situation, Beta Persei would not dare to send the telegram at this time. But he still came, which could only prove one thing. Something had happened. He reached out and took the telegram. After casually glancing at it, he put it aside as if nothing had happened. Next, he accompanied Hu Yen to watch the new song and dance arranged by the Arts and Crafts Regiment for a while. Seeing that the other party was tired, he asked Xiaoqing and other personal maids to send the madam to rest. After Hu Yan's back was out of sight, Yang Chendong turned and went to the office in the hall. As soon as he entered the large study, Yang Chendong looked at Beta Persei, who followed closely behind him, and asked, "What's going on in the Far Eastern region?" "Young master, after receiving the telegram from Governor Chen Bo, I immediately asked the Security Bureau and the CIA. There was soon news from there. It should be that Tang Sheng, the commander of the 4th Cavalry Division of the Far Eastern Army, suddenly rebelled and joined forces with the cavalry of a Siberian Mongolian tribe, Kanhulahin, to attack the state capital of Archon. After a bloody battle, Governor Chen Bo disappeared, and now the Far Eastern region is basically in the hands of Tang Sheng. Beta Persei obviously came prepared and reported after investigating the specific situation. Khan of Siberia, Tang Sheng rebelled, Yang Chendong muttered. After an unknown period of time, a cold voice suddenly sounded. "Humph, they are courting death." At this time, Yang Xie was so powerful that others were afraid that they would find trouble with him. How could there be people who were so blind as to find trouble with him? There was also that commander called Tang Sheng. He was in such a high position, yet he still rebelled. Yang Chendong really couldn't figure it out and was even angrier. However, there were some things that anger alone couldn't solve. What did Tiger's Mane say? Tiger's Mane's new army was in the beginning city, which was the closest to the Far Eastern region. If there was a problem there, they should have reacted immediately. Perhaps the army to quell the rebellion had already been sent out. This, Beta Persei lowered his head, his expression a little ugly. "What do you mean by this and that? I'm asking you, how many reinforcements are you going to send for the new army? Who will lead them?" Yang Chendong wished that he could give Beta Persei a kick. Why did it take so much effort to speak? Where did his usual straightforwardness and cleverness go? Beta Persei didn't dare to dodge Yang Qindong's kick, nor could he dodge it. He straightened his body and said, "Young master, regarding the matter of sending reinforcements, the officers of the new army have different opinions, so much so that Tiger's Mane can't force a decision." The so-called difference in opinions was still pleasant to hear. The truth was that everyone thought that the Far Eastern region was too poor and too far away, so there was no point in occupying it. Think about it. What did they get after occupying the Far Eastern region all these years? Other than the last time when the beginning city was in danger, Commander Chen Bo brought 4 cavalry divisions to help. He had always been asking for things. After careful calculation, with so much manpower, material resources, and financial resources, not to mention 1 army, even 3 armies could be built. The beginning city had begun to be self-sufficient through its own efforts. Neither Tiger's Mane nor Yumian wanted to continue to ask for help from Qiqian City. They wanted true economic independence. The fertile fields on the grasslands and the various small factories in the city were where their confidence came from. However, they still had to provide the Far Eastern region with goods, which greatly dragged them down, making it difficult for them to become economically self-sufficient. Now that there was a problem, wasn't this an opportunity to shift the blame? This was also the reason why they hadn't sent any reinforcements, even though they had heard the news from the other side. Beta Persei's words were vague, but Yang Qindong was very clear in his heart. However, he didn't blame Tiger's Mane, Yumian, and the others for this matter. If he wanted to blame someone, he could only blame them for not having enough foresight and not knowing the benefits and importance of the Far Eastern region. Make the arrangements. After 3 days, we will set off. This trip to the Far Eastern region, since no one is willing to do it, this young master will go personally. Yang Qindong said with determination. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision, but the problem related to the Far Eastern region should also be solved. Not only that, but the problems of the Golden Horde and the Ross country should also be solved this time. Although he had given Chen Bo a lot of ideas, it seemed that the effect wasn't very good. As a mission in the future, he had been to the Far East region and knew the approximate location of some of the minerals there. Chapter 1367. Yes, Beta Persei had long since had enough of staying in Resin City. Although his wife and children were in Resin City, he was only in his early 30s. It was not the time for him to retire yet. What he should do the most was to make meritorious contributions. Where would meritorious contributions come from? Staying in Resin City was just for experience. How could it be as strong as leaving this place and opening up new territories everywhere? Beta Persei excitedly went to make arrangements. Yang Qindong sat in the chair in the study room. After thinking about how many troops and supplies he needed to bring with him, he quickly got up. Since he was going to leave, he had to talk to the madam. Over the years, they had always been apart more than together. Speaking of which, he owed them too much. No, he had already thought about it. When everything was on the right track, he would take the madam to walk around and accompany them. In the bedroom of the madam, Princess Huyen, Yang Qindong dismissed everyone. Even Yang Bo went out to play with the maids, leaving only Yang Qindong and Huyen cuddling together. Huyen had just been found to be pregnant. It was the time for her to stay still and not move. At this moment, she was half lying in Yang Qindong's arms with a face full of happiness. "I'm sorry." After a long silence, Yang Qindong finally spoke. "Dong Shuai, are you leaving again?" After just one sentence, Huyen's expression changed, and her body trembled. But she quickly hid all her panic. Ever since she married Yang Qindong, she knew that her man was a man who could do great things. He must not be restrained by his love life. Towards Yang Qindong, the 8 madams each had their own way of addressing him. For example, the second Madam Chow Yin was used to calling him young master, the fifth Madam Tua Yu was used to calling him war god, the sixth Madam Wan Xiaoyu liked to call him big brother, the eighth Madam Junko was willing to call him king, and the other madams called him husband. Hu Yan had always called him Dong Shuai. The nickname Dong Shuai was given to Yang Qindong when he first showed his talent in Ming. At that time, he was famous for his talent and won Hu Yan's heart. Yes, there are some things that have to be done. It's just that I'm really worried about leaving you guys behind. Yang Qindong didn't deny it. He was really worried. This time was different from the past. 7 out of the 8 madams were pregnant. How could a father be at ease? Don't worry. Everything in the palace has been handed over to Yin. With Tai Qingyi, the head of the palace's guards, there won't be any problems. Dong Shuai, just do what you think you should do. This concubine will wait for your return in the palace. Although she was very reluctant, Hu Yan still spoke in such a magnanimous manner. This was the overall situation in the eyes of a woman. All right. Since the young master was the one who decided to establish the Far Eastern region and invested so much, if something happened there, it must be saved and rebuilt. Saving people was a must. This was also what Tiger's Mane and Yu Mian wanted. However, if it wasn't to rebuild it, the two of them had some opinions. Seeing that Yang Si proposed to send people again, Tiger's Mane sighed and said, "We will definitely send people, but how many people to send and what kind of goal we want to achieve, we still need to discuss this matter properly." That's right. It's not difficult to save Governor Chen, but if we want to establish a foothold there again, I'm afraid that we won't be able to do it with too few troops. However, considering the difficulty of transporting supplies, if we send too many troops, the logistical pressure will be great. It's really difficult. Yu Mian also spoke. He spoke from the perspective of a city lord and from an economic point of view. Tiger's Mane was the new army commander, so his focus was more on military matters. He was particular about using the least amount of troops to obtain the greatest benefits. Just from this point alone, there was no need to fight for the Far Eastern region. Yu Mian was the same. From an economic point of view, investment and income were not proportional, so there was no point in rebuilding the Far Eastern region. The two of them still had the same opinion as before, so Yang Si, who originally wanted to say something, could only shut his mouth. All right, since that's the case, I'll send a report to the young master and ask the young master to make a decision. Yang Si didn't have any intention of fighting for it. He didn't want this matter to affect his relationship with Tiger's Mane and Yu Mian. However, he believed that once this matter was reported to the young master, there would definitely be a result. At that time, with the young master's orders, who would dare to disobey? The telegram was sent out, but what was puzzling was that every telegram was like a stone sinking into the sea. There was no reply at all. After a few consecutive telegrams without any results, Tiger's Mane and the other two couldn't sit still anymore. Regardless of whether it was possible or not, they should at least send a telegram. What did they mean by not asking? Without a definite answer, Tiger's Mane and the other two couldn't help but feel flustered. Did this mean that the sixth young master was dissatisfied? We can't wait any longer. We have to confirm the number of troops to send out. Tiger's Mane once again called the three of them together and said this. It was almost April. The road leading to the Far Eastern region had already been opened, and the snow was dissipating every day. It was time to attack. How many people should we send? How much logistical support do we need? Can we win in a single battle? Should we bring Governor Chen and the others back, or rebuild the Far Eastern region? Chapter 1368. However, this voice had always been suppressed by Yang Qindong. He did not care if others said that he was militaristic, nor did he care if others said that he was a murderous demon king. This was because no one in this world knew better than him how vast this world was and how many places there were that needed to be conquered. Yang Qindong single-handedly created Yangxie and established the five-star army. If even his actions were questioned by his subordinates, one could imagine that if he could not conquer more territory in his lifetime, once he was no longer around and his successor was replaced, would he still have the courage and influence to unify the entire world and make the Han people the only ruler? Yang Qindong did not dare to think about it. He could only lower his head and do it. Fortunately, although the price to pay for occupation and expansion was not small, the businesses in Crimson City were diversified, and the money they earned was enough to cover the expenses of the war. For example, provinces such as Vietnam and Laos, after being ruled for many years, had already reached a balance of income and expenditure. If they continued, they would be able to provide returns to Crimson City. Coupled with his powerful charisma and influence, no one dared to publicly criticize the expansion. Even he had to put in so much effort, so he did not dare to leave this matter to others. This was the reason why the primordial city had not sent out any reinforcements, even though there was a problem in the far eastern region. After Yumian expressed his thoughts, Tiger's Mane could only nod his head in agreement after a moment of silence. All right, then why don't we do as City Lord Yu says? Without a better suggestion, although Yumian's method was a little conservative, it was safe. Before Yang Qindong's telegram arrived, it would be better to do as he said. Yang Si did not say yes or no. He was like a mute the entire time, not saying a word. He also did not understand what the young master meant, but his intuition told him that the young master of the Far Eastern region would not give up. Otherwise, he would not have sacrificed so much over the years. Yang Si didn't say anything, so Tiger's Mane and Yumian made the decision. After some discussion, they decided to send the 101st Division out to assist the Far Eastern region. They wanted to find Governor Chen and bring him back. The 101 SD Division's commander was Lu Shua. He was an extremely senior general. He was a calm and steady person, and it was more than appropriate for him to complete the rescue mission. They quickly came to a decision. The 101st Division was ordered to prepare for battle. 7 days later, the army would head north to the far eastern state. When an army set out on an expedition, it was necessary to deploy troops, allocate provisions, prepare equipment, clothing, and so on. It was a very tedious matter. He quickly put away the map of the far eastern region and walked out of the office while tidying up his military uniform. At the same time, his expression was very unpleasant. At this time, the young master had arrived in the origin city. This could only mean one thing. The young master was dissatisfied with their work. As the young master's most trusted person, he felt that his face had lost all light and even felt a burning pain. With a gloomy face, Tiger's Mane did not care about discussing the war with Lu Shua. At this moment, he strode out of the army headquarters and went straight to the east gate of the origin city with Yang Si. On the way, they met Yumian, who was also worried and had an unpleasant expression. However, this time, the three of them did not even want to exchange pleasantries. They just nodded to each other and strode forward. At the east gate, the travel-worn Yang Qindong appeared in the distance with the black cavalry. In order to rush for time, Yang Qindong and the others stopped their horses, but did not stop. Along the way, they changed their horses countless times and finally arrived at the origin city in the shortest time possible. Compared to the last time he left, Yang Qindong's face was also full of displeasure. Obviously, Tiger's Mane, Yumian, and Yang Si's response to the problem of the far eastern region this time made him very dissatisfied. However, although he was dissatisfied, Yang Qindong did not intend to blame the three of them. After all, not everyone knew the importance of the far eastern region like he did. Even in the future, the far eastern region accounted for more than a quarter of the entire country. It was not an exaggeration to say that once it was occupied and stabilized, it would not be far from unifying the entire Russia. Of course, the current Russia could not even be called a country. It was still living a difficult life under the oppression of the descendants of the Mongolian cavalry. At the East Gate, Tiger's Mane and the other higher-ups of the origin city stood there. As soon as they saw Yang Qindong appear on the white dragon, the people led by Tiger's Mane knelt on the ground with a plop and pleaded guilty. "Let's talk about it after we enter the city." Yang Qindong only looked around before he rode on his horse. This time, he did not dismount from his horse and exchange greetings with everyone, which already showed his dissatisfaction. He could not blame these people, but it was necessary to give them some face. Otherwise, if he encountered such a thing in the future, he did not know what would happen. Tiger's Mane and the others followed behind Yang Qindong with a nervous heart and arrived at the palace courtyard of the origin city. When the high-ranking and middle-ranking people were rejected outside the palace, and only Tiger's Mane and the other two were left, they once again knelt on the ground with a plop. Beta Persei had already found a chair for Yang Qindong to sit down, and then stood aside. This time, Beta Persei was also very angry. The young master had requested the development of the Far Eastern region. He had also invested a lot of manpower and material resources and stationed an army there. When something happened there, the origin city was the closest. They should have sent reinforcements as soon as possible. Why did it take so long? No matter what reason they had, it was clear that they did not believe in the young master. Based on this point, Beta Persei had no intention of pleading for Tiger's Mane and the others. As the one who had followed Yang Qindong for the longest time, Beta Persei knew better than anyone else how powerful the sixth master was. Although his mind was also full of doubts about some things, it was undeniable that the young master's strength had completely conquered him. Even if the young master brought him and the two of them to rush into the great Ming palace, he would not be full of doubts like others. Instead, he would carry out his orders without blinking. Beta Persei's ability to execute and obey orders was something that Yang Qindong admired very much. Moreover, this person was also smart. He knew what could be said and what could not be asked. This was the main reason why Yang Qindong was willing to keep him by his side. Yang Qindong had no intention of letting the three of them get up. He sat there and listened to their reports. This was especially true for the northern Ming dynasty. When Yang Qindong left, he had already laid the foundation for everything. The defeat of Baiming's 400,000 troops had greatly damaged Baiming's arrogant momentum. In the end, they had to give in and sent Shi Heng to discuss reconciliation with Yu Mian. 1 million Han people had been sent over, and Gao Yu and the others were also sent back to Baiming's imperial court. Naturally, it was impossible for the soldiers who had surrendered to be returned. With people and a sufficient population, many things would be easier to do. The land around the origin city was once again reclaimed in large amounts. A large number of potatoes and corn were planted. It could be imagined that the origin city would be self-sufficient in terms of food in the future. His Majesty personally reported the matter, but there was no joy on his face. All of this was arranged by Yang Qindong before he left. He was just carrying out his orders and did not deserve any credit. Yu Mian had just closed his mouth after reporting when Tiger's Mane, who could not wait any longer, had already opened his mouth. "Young master, I'm guilty. Please punish me." About the Far East. Well, you don't have to worry about the problems in the Far East. The new army group will take good care of the origin city and be the logistics officers of the new army and the new 5 armies. Yang Qindong simply waved his hand. Chapter 1369. Young master, our new Knowing that Yang Chendong was displeased, Tiger's Mane still wanted to continue to fight for it. However, Yang Chendong spoke again. This time, the young master will personally lead the troops, so you don't have to ask for instructions. By the way, this trip will use a lot of manpower. The required food and other things will be transported over from Red Nest City soon. Yes, everything will be handed over to the logistics command. As soon as he spoke, he only mentioned Yang Xi's name and even excluded Yu Mian. Immediately, Yu Mian's expression became very ugly. Yu Mian was not as simple as Yu Qian's son. If that was the case, Yang Chendong would not have given him such an important task. At most, he would have spent more money to find a comfortable position for him to stay. But he didn't. Instead, he placed such an important burden on him. Just this point alone was enough to prove his ability. However, having ability did not mean that he was completely open-minded. At least, when it came to dealing with the matters in the Far Eastern region, he did not do very well. His thinking was too conservative. In this matter, Yang Chendong could also see that a person like Yu Mian had no problem keeping his position, but when it came to pioneering, he was still lacking a lot. Since that was the case, he would just guard his home well. This could be considered as making the best use of people. Tiger's Mane and Yu Mian, the two people who opposed increasing the investment in the Far Eastern region, had stepped aside. Only Yang Xi, who had always advocated for greater support, was placed in an important position. This already showed Yang Chendong's attitude. By the way, this time, the new Second Army will also be transferred to the front line of the Far Eastern region. The two cities that they are guarding, Shajing and Jingzhou, will belong to the new First Army's line of defense in the future. The two of you must guard them well. Yang Chendong seemed to have thought of something and added this sentence. After that, he turned around and left. They had not rested along the way, so they had to have a good sleep first. After Yang Chendong left, Yang Xi also had a lot of things to do and went to the logistics command to make arrangements. Only Tiger's Mane and Yu Mian were left behind. Needless to say, Tiger's Mane's performance this time had disappointed the young master. He regretted it 1,000 times. If he knew that the young master valued the Far Eastern region so much, he would not care whether the effort and the reward was proportional. He would have ordered the troops to send support long ago. Now, not only himself, even the new Second Army's army. This time, even the new Second Army was thrown to the side. This made him feel very uncomfortable. However, Yu Mian, he did not have to admit. Yang Chendong looked at Yu Mian, who looked like he would die if he did not kneel. He was too lazy to care. As long as the other party was happy, he could do whatever he wanted. Finally, he could kneel on the ground. Yu Mian looked quite happy. He first straightened his body, and then said, "King, it was my idea not to send troops to support the Far Eastern region. It has nothing to do with Commander Tiger. This subject believes that the Far Eastern province is too far away. Moreover, half of the year is cold. There is no future for development in such a cold place. It is not worth investing too much in that place. Now that you have decided on the grasslands, you said that there are many mines near the beginning city. Now, what we need to do is to stabilize the situation here, appease the people here, and open up grain fields and mines. We will win step by step. When we are strong enough, it will not be too late to think of a way to go north. King, it has always been a taboo for military personnel to go on an expedition. King, you can't put the army in danger because of your reputation. It is not worth it." As he spoke, Yu Mian knelt on the ground and kowtowed. With just a few kowtows, blood seeped out of his forehead. If not for Tiger's Mane, who was at the side, who reacted quickly, the consequences would have been even more serious. This scene opened Yang Chendong's eyes. In the past, He had seen in some history books that some upright officials had done all sorts of courting death in order to make the emperor accept them. However, that was only limited to written records. In this life, he had become Bugnam of Gojosian, but none of his subordinates had done so. He had attributed everything to his own wisdom. Because he was wise, his subordinates would not oppose his ideas. But now, Yu Mian's actions had let him know that even if he thought that something was right, others would not necessarily think that way. He sighed in his heart. Do you think that what is right must be right? Of course, Yang Chendong would not say such words out loud. It would hurt the hearts of his subjects, and it was not something a ruler would do. What he wanted to do now was not to reprimand, but to reason. Using reason to convince the other party was using virtue to convince them. Ahem, Yu Mian, you said that the Far Eastern Prefecture is a bitter and cold place. Then let me ask you, wasn't the beginning city a bitter and cold place in the past? When we first invested in building the city here, who would have thought that this place would have such a day? Since the beginning city can create miracles, why can't the Far Eastern Prefecture? It's different. Yu Mian raised his head and said rather firmly, after all, the beginning city is only at the edge of the grassland. Whether it is by land or by water, it can be considered convenient. Moreover, this place has an extremely important military role. It is worth investing a little more here. Then who can say that the Far Eastern Prefecture has no important military geographical role? Who knows if the Far Eastern Prefecture will be as prosperous as the beginning city one day, or even surpass this place? Yang Chendong, who was familiar with the history of the future, knew very well that what he said was correct because the later generations had used their actions to prove all of this. Yu Mian did not know about this. He just thought that Yang Chendong did all of this for the sake of his reputation. In his opinion, Bugnam of Gojosian already knew that investing so much manpower and material resources in the Far Eastern Prefecture was a losing deal. It was just that he cared about his reputation and could not admit it. Now, he still had to continue to invest more manpower and financial resources in the Far Eastern Prefecture. This was simply going further and further down the wrong path. As a person who was put in an important position and was also a person who had received kindness, Yu Mian had to stand up and speak properly. Although the king's reputation was important, he could not make mistakes again and again just because of his reputation and lose so many people and money. Although Yang Chendong's words were true, it was a pity that Yu Mian, who thought that he had seen through everything, did not think so. Seeing that Yang Chendong was still talking about how good the Far Eastern Prefecture was, Yu Mian's face showed disbelief. This scene was seen by Yang Chendong. He knew that Yu Mian did not believe his judgment of the Far Eastern Prefecture at all. Since that was the case, no matter how much he explained, it was useless. He could only use practical actions to slap his face. All right, since City Lord Yu does not believe it, why don't we make a bet? Bet! This subject does not gamble. Yu Mian shook his head and said with disdain, Your mother. Yang Chendong almost cursed out. In the face of such a stubborn subject like Yu Mian, he really didn't know what to say. He was even more certain in his heart that he had to put on an act this time and succeed. Otherwise, with this victory, he was afraid that in the future, he would not only have Yu Mian under his command, but also Wang Mian and Li Mian. At that time, it would be even more difficult to do anything. This would also be a huge blow to his authority, which was something he absolutely did not want to see. No, this time, you have to bet even if you don't want to bet. Within 3 years, if the Far Eastern Prefecture is not self-sufficient and cannot prove its important military geographical position, then it will be considered as this king's loss. In the future, if you have any suggestions, this king will listen carefully and can even give priority to your opinion. But if everything is proven after 3 years, then it will be your loss. At that time, when this king makes any decision, you cannot obstruct or interfere. How about it? With more than 40,000 soldiers, they would not be afraid even if they faced enemies several times their number. Needless to say, they were already humiliated by the fake surrender. They were eager to change themselves through a big battle. They naturally responded to Yang Qindong's summons this time. From the commander to the soldiers, they were all full of fighting spirit. Dai Ku was originally a member of the Far Eastern Army. This time, he was transferred by Yang Qindong. He wanted to take advantage of the other party's familiarity with the situation to enter the Far Eastern region. With the help of this division, they would be able to achieve twice the result with half the effort. When the three saw Yang Qindong in the main hall, they all excitedly saluted. Just from their appearance, they should have made sufficient preparations. Very good. Looking at your appearance, this king has an idea in his heart. Looking at the three, Yang Qindong also smiled. This was a confident smile. Presumably, you already know about the matter. Tang Shengjuan's change has caused the situation in the Far Eastern region to be unclear. It has also successfully provoked the anger of our 5-star army. This time, this king will personally go and let those who betrayed and dared to be our enemies know the consequences of angering our 5-star army. How about it? Do the three of you have the confidence to enter the Far Eastern region and show the might of our 5-star army? Yes, the three answered in unison. Their faces were filled with excitement before the big battle. Haha, good. Let's discuss the matter of sending troops. While Yang Qindong was laughing, Beta Persei had already commanded several black cavalry to carry the map of the Far Eastern region. That night, everyone discussed until late into the night before dispersing. With the provisions prepared by the new army group for the 101st Division, Yang Qindong only rested in the first city for 2 days. Then, he personally led the 2,000 black cavalry, a regiment under Division Commander Dai Ku, and the 1st Division of the 1st Heaven Cavalry Army to the north as the vanguard. Bei Bei would lead the other 4 divisions of the 1st Heaven Cavalry Army, the other 4 regiments under Dai Ku, and the new 2nd Army to wait for the arrival of the supplies from Resin City. This time, Yang Qindong obviously put in a lot of capital. It was said that there were dozens of large ships and 2,000 carriages of supplies transported from Resin City alone. Besides, Yang Qindong also went straight to the north after leaving the first city. He walked along the road that was previously used to transport supplies. The road from the first city to the Far Eastern region was indeed not short, but the road was not that difficult to walk. On the contrary, they had been repairing the road. After a few days, they saw the Arden River. At this point, the scouts in the vanguard finally sent news that they had seen signs of human habitation. Beside the Arden River, the water plants had already developed from light green to dark green. It was also close to the water source. This kind of place was often the favorite environment of herders. It was reasonable to see humans in this kind of place. There weren't many people on the other side, at most 100 or so. When Yang Qindong led the vanguard to the riverside, the originally busy herdsmen panicked. The screams of women, the cries of children, and some young men had already rushed out of the tents with daggers in their hands, standing together at the outermost circle. Herders had their own rules. Once they encountered an unknown situation, the young men in the tribe would habitually protect the elderly, women, and children in the middle. This way, they could better protect the tribe in battle. Under normal circumstances, even if these young men were all killed, the elderly, women, and children would not be in any danger. They would only become the slaves of another tribe. It was the same everywhere. If one wanted to survive, they would always need a large number of people. Sometimes the result of leading two tribes directly to war was just to snatch the population. Sometimes a woman would be snatched more than a dozen times from her youth to her old age, so much so that she would forget who the first leader of the tribe was. The sudden appearance of the 5-star army, each riding a tall horse and holding a sharp saber in their hands, caused the young men of this small tribe to show fear and powerlessness. When one side's strength was thousands of times stronger than the other side, there was no need to fight this war. This also caused them to feel despair. "Army, stop advancing," Beta Persei shouted after receiving the order. As soon as his loud voice came out, the cavalry warriors of the 1st Division of the world's cavalry army all stopped. Chapter 1371. Army, set up camp here. It was still Beta Persei's loud voice that reverberated through the air. It was good to have Beta Persei. At least he didn't need to use a loudspeaker to pass down orders. The 5-star army cavalry stopped, and so did the black cavalry. Only Yang Qindong, Beta Persei, Tian Hu, and Ba Dao Jiang rode their horses towards the herdsman's tent that was surrounded. The reason why it was called a tent and not a yurt was because these herdsmen were not of Mongolian descent. They were authentic Russian people with white skin. Among the crowd, other than Yang Qindong, it was the first time the other three had seen authentic Caucasians. They couldn't help but look at them curiously. However, Yang Qindong's expression was calm. He rode to the outermost periphery and looked at the 20 or so young men and asked, "Hello, can you speak Chinese?" Of course, this sentence was spoken in Russian. In his previous life, although Yang Qindong entered the military very early and didn't have the opportunity to further his studies in university, he was very familiar with the languages and cultures of various countries. This was what people meant when they said that reading 10,000 books was not as good as walking 10,000 miles. "Yes, we can speak." One of the young men, who was more than 8 feet tall, looked at Yang Qindong with some vigilance and answered, "Very good." Yang Qindong didn't want to speak in bird language. It would be great if the other party could speak Chinese. He smiled and nodded. "Then I'll have to trouble you to take me to see your patriarch. Don't worry, I have no ill intentions." As he said this, Yang Qindong deliberately spread out his hands to show that he didn't have any weapons. He looked harmless and friendly. In fact, Yang Qindong really didn't have any intention of doing anything to these people, unless they were hostile forces. Otherwise, Yang Qindong would treat everyone he met here as his quasi-citizens. He could become a member of Yangxia at any time. How could he do something that would harm his own strength? Yang Qindong spoke politely, but the young man knew that he had no other choice. Seeing that the other party had over 10,000 cavalrymen, they didn't even need to lift a finger to deal with the 20 of them. All they needed to do was to spit at them. However, they didn't take action immediately. Instead, they wanted to settle the problem peacefully. This was already giving them a lot of face. "Please." Knowing that he had no other choice, the young man nodded in the end. He then turned around and led Yang Qindong back to the tribe's tent. Yang Qindong's party still had 4 people, and they were moving forward at a moderate pace. Although there were only 4 of them, each of them was more powerful than the other. Even if there were 10 times more of them, they would not be afraid, not to mention that there were only 20 or so saber-wielding youngsters. It was only a tribe of about 100 people. Their territory was not large. After traveling for tens of meters, they arrived at a tent that seemed to be in good condition. Yang Qindong happily dismounted from his horse and looked at the unguarded tent. He asked, "Here?" "Yes." The young man just nodded and didn't make much of an introduction. Then he looked at Yang Qindong with his big eyes. Obviously, He was paying attention to his every move. Hee hee, Yang Chendong chuckled, thinking in his heart, is this a test of my courage? Does he need to get a group of executioners to throw cups as a signal? But I don't think a small tribe like this has such strength. Yang Chendong, who didn't want to be looked down upon, decided to enter the tent to take a look. Beta Persei wanted to rush in first to observe the environment, but he was stopped by him. The 5-star army suddenly appeared here, so it was impossible for the other party to set up an ambush. And even if there was, with his strength as a grandmaster, why would he be afraid? Under the slightly scrutinizing gaze of the white man, Yang Chendong casually lifted the curtain and walked in empty-handed. Just this boldness alone made the white man nod involuntarily. In his heart, his impression of Yang Chendong increased by a lot. He lifted the curtain and entered the tent. The first thing that caught his eye was a warm breath. With just a quick glance, Yang Chendong calculated that there were at least 30 people in the tent. Among them, women and children were the most, and the elderly were the least. Among them, the old man sitting in the middle of the tent stood out even more. Unlike the other people in the tent, when the other people's faces were filled with fear, the old man in the tent was calmly looking at Yang Chendong. Yang Chendong was also looking at the old man. He had a feeling that this old man must have a story. At least, he should have seen a lot of life and death situations. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so calm. Both sides were looking at each other, but no one spoke first. After about 10 breaths of time, Beta Persei finally couldn't help but shout outside the tent, "Young master, are you okay?" "I'm fine. Go get some food and drink and send it in," Yang Chendong said without turning his head. Then he strode towards the old man and said with a smile on his face, "How should I address you, sir?" The old man had never seen such a calm and collected person entering the tent alone in his entire life. Unconsciously, he put away a short knife hidden in his sleeve and forced a smile on his face. "I'm Jurovsky, the chief of these people. How should I address you, sir?" Yang Chendong could indeed be called a distinguished guest. Just the golden robe on his body was not ordinary. It was dazzling. "So it's the chief of a tribe. Sorry for the disrespect. My name is Yang Chendong, and the people on the grassland also call me Tian Khan." Yang Chendong chuckled and strode to the old man's side. Then he casually sat down cross-legged. The moment the heavenly Khan's name was mentioned, the expressions of everyone in the tent changed. Then all sorts of fear and dread filled their faces once again. The name Tian Khan was now only used on the Mongols. As the Russians who had been ruled by the Mongols for more than 200 years, they both hated and feared them. It was not an exaggeration to say that many times the words "Mongols are here" could stop babies from crying. Yang Chendong saw everyone's reaction, and he wanted to explain something. However, before he could speak, the chief called Jurovsky spoke first. "Don't panic, don't panic. He's different from ordinary Mongols." The chief said this in Russian, so Yang Chendong naturally heard it clearly. He couldn't help but ask, curiously, "Why am I different from other Mongols?" "You can understand Russian?" The old man was shocked at first, but he quickly calmed down. It was obvious that in this area, the Russians and Mongols interacted with each other, and there was no distinction between them. The language was also a little messy. Just like how the Russians could speak Chinese and Mongolian, why couldn't they speak Russian? After the old man's reprimand, the tent quietened down. The chief looked at Yang Chendong and asked, "Tian Khan? Forgive this old man for being slow, but it seems that other than the noble Genghis Khan, no one else dares to use this name." "That's right." Yang Chendong smiled and nodded. He did not expect the chieftain to be so knowledgeable. However, there was one thing he had to correct. "I am not a Mongol. I am a Han Chinese. The title Heavenly Khan, is a form of respect for me. You're not a Mongol? You're a Han? Jurovsky's face flashed with surprise for the first time. Then he thought of something and asked, "But what's the relationship between the Tian Khan and the Han people in the Far East?" He didn't expect the old man to know about the Han people in the Far East. Yang Chendong was also interested. "You know about them?" "That's right, we're together." When he heard Yang Chendong admit it, the chief's expression relaxed a little. He then said, "I've been to the Far East before. I even moved stones there and helped build the city. I even received some wages. The Han people there are not bad." Wages? Not bad. Yang Chendong didn't understand this information. Since the old man had been to the Far East, why didn't he live there? This was much better than wandering around. With doubts in his heart, Yang Chendong asked, "I didn't expect the chief to have helped there. But what's your impression of the place?" Impression? The chief seemed to recall and said, "It's not bad. At least they don't discriminate against us Russians. We're paid well." Chapter 1372. Thinking of this, Yang Chendong was even more confident about the 3-year agreement. In the past, he couldn't find the root of the problem, but now he knew where the mistake was. As long as he corrected it, the development of the Far Eastern Prefecture would improve. Perhaps in less than 3 years, everything would change, and the Yang faction would have another large base of operations. If he wanted to change, he had to start with himself. Thinking of this, Yang Chendong stood up. Seeing Jurovsky's confused look, Yang Chendong stood up and bowed to him. This bow frightened Jurovsky. He would never forget that the Heavenly Khan had 10,000 cavalrymen just outside the tent. Now that he was on the chopping block, how could he accept such a great bow? Jurovsky wanted to get up and move out of the way, but Yang Chendong had already turned around and bowed to everyone in the tent. His voice rang out. What happened in the Far Eastern region was unfair to everyone. Since I, the Heavenly Khan, am here, I naturally have to change. Like this, if you want to settle down in the Far Eastern region in the future, you can come at any time. I swear in the name of the Heavenly Khan that when that time comes, as long as you are willing, you can live in the city. No one will chase you away. The so-called relying on the people to establish a base. It referred to uniting more people to fight against the enemy. Of course, it was not only the Hans who would unite, but also the local natives, the nearby Russians, and the Mongols who were willing to turn over a new leaf. In fact, uniting more people meant uniting more people who were willing to stop fighting, willing to work for peace, and willing to work for a better future. As long as they were willing, regardless of race, skin color, or region, they would unite together. Only then could the Far Eastern region gain the strongest influence in the shortest time possible and establish a firm foothold. As for the problem of those who were not of the same race, that would be treated differently in the future. It would be fine as long as they did not give the foreign races more power and status. This did not mean that all the foreign races were enemies. If that was the case, there would be no need to talk about unifying the world. Furthermore, without the foreign races as a foil, how could the Hans show off their noble status? It was like returning home in glory. He had to let more people know about it. Otherwise, it would lose its original meaning of traveling in the night. What? Upon seeing Yang Chendong's vow, Jurovsky's eyes widened as he stared at Yang Chendong in disbelief. In addition to shock, there was also doubt in his eyes. Yang Chendong looked like he was in his 30s, and because his martial realm had reached the Grandmaster realm, he looked even younger. Could such a young man really do what he said? Most importantly, he didn't have the final say. After a person filled their stomach, the next thing to consider was how to obtain more wealth so that they wouldn't starve anymore. Yang Chendong, who was very clear about the hearts of these herdsmen, used his trump card, silver. when Yang Chendong explained to Jurovsky that in the future, people other than the Han people would be allowed to live in the Far Eastern region. And not only that, as long as they acknowledged and returned to the Far Eastern region, they would be able to obtain an identity certificate, be allocated farmland, have a job, and have their own house. Jurovsky's eyes lit up when he heard this. Because of the geographical climate, the Far Eastern region was indeed vast and sparsely populated. However, this didn't mean that there were no people here. It was just that the place was too big, and there were too many people, so it didn't attract much attention. However, if one were to count carefully, the population here would be at least a few 100,000, or even more. There were countless mountains, forests, and lakes here. There were wild beasts in the mountains and fresh fish in the lakes. These were all things that could fill one's stomach. Compared to the grassland, which only had green grass, it was many times better. Thus, this place had always been very attractive. The reason why people didn't come here was because the winter was too cold and there was no guarantee of safety. However, if they had a place like the Far Eastern region, they would have their own house. Winter wouldn't be so cold, and there would be more guarantee of safety. Thus, how could such a place not be attractive? After hearing Yang Chendong's words, Jurovsky nodded solemnly. "Thank you, Kantian. Don't worry. I will do my best to tell this good news to the other tribes." Yang Chendong was in a good mood after persuading Jurovsky without much effort. Then, he casually asked if anything special had happened in this place recently. This was just a casual question. Yang Chendong didn't think that Jurovsky would know anything. After all, they still didn't know that there was a mutiny in the Far Eastern region. Naturally, they wouldn't know too much about the outside world. What was unexpected was that this was just a casual question, but he actually managed to get some information out of it. Jurovsky actually said something strange. "Heavenly Khan, it's not far from here, by the Amuga River. Our tribesmen accidentally saw a group of Mongolian cavalry stationed there." Mongol cavalry? When he heard this, Yang Chendong's eyes lit up. He immediately asked, "How many people?" "A few hundred. You can ask Nikolai for the specifics. He was the one who saw it." After saying this, Jurovsky said something to a woman beside him. The woman nodded and left. Not long after, Nikolai walked into the tent. Nikolai was the leader of the young people who blocked the Five-Star Army. Their mission was to be in charge of the safety of this area, and at the same time, to see if there were any enemies from the Far East who escaped from here. However, their gazes were mostly on the inner side, and they did not pay much attention to the south of the Amu Jia River. In their eyes, the enemy was in the north, not the south. As for whether or not someone would attack them from the south, it was not a problem for them to consider. There were 300 Mongol cavalry here. Although they were not elites, they were not something that anyone could target. For example, if Chieftain Jurovsky's 100-man tribe encountered them, they would probably run as far away as possible. If they wanted to face 300 Mongol cavalry who lived on horses all year round, they would need at least 1,000 cavalry to dare to take the risk. This was where Ahuchi's confidence came from. As the general of the 300 cavalrymen, he had never thought that anyone would harm him. All he thought about was how to find the Far East army that had escaped and then strike at them to gain merit. As such, when Yang Chendong brought 500 black cavalry units to the south of the Amu Jia River, Ahiki, who received the news, did not panic. Instead, he calmly walked out of the tent. When his subordinates reported that there was a cavalry unit in black armor outside the tent, Ahiki did not believe it and thought that it was an exaggeration. No matter if it was in Siberia or the Far East, iron was hard to find. If a normal person could get a good weapon, they would be proud of it for a long time. Who would be able to make armor out of iron? That was not a waste, but a luxury. Even the personal guards of Khan Hulahin only had leather armor on their upper bodies, which was already very enviable. With disbelief, Ahiki walked out of the tent. As expected, he saw a sea of black armor, and his eyes were filled with greed. Even though there were 500 cavalry, far more than the 300 he brought with him, there was no fear in his eyes. However, there was no trace of fear in Ahachi's eyes. Perhaps it was because he had not had an opponent for many years, but he was used to treating everyone as prey. Even if there were 500 Black Knight Dragon Guards, he still thought the same. He was already used to treating this area as his own backyard. Ahiki did not think that there was anyone he could not defeat. Even if there were more enemies than him, and their equipment was better than his, it was still the same. War is not about who has better equipment. Ahiki muttered to himself. He then raised his right hand above his head and shouted, "All troops, gather!" The 300 Mongolian cavalry had already gotten on their horses. When they heard the general's order, they quickly gathered around Ahiki in groups of 10. It was said that small details revealed true ability. Just based on how quickly the Mongolian cavaliers gathered together, this was a group of well-trained cavaliers. This was especially so when there was a rare look of fearlessness in their eyes, and this was something that was rarely seen among the five-star armies. Ha ha! Yang Qindong, who was riding on the white dragon, also laughed. He did not think that there was anything special about this Mongolian cavalry. He had seen many such opponents, and the strongest was the Walla cavalry led by Yeshen. But what was the result? Didn't they still lose at his hands? They had once looked down on the five-star army, but reality would give them a slap in the face. He also did not think that this Mongolian cavalry was that strong. Young master, Yang heir, who had been following Wang Chong from the side, had an excited expression on his face. It was rare for him to encounter an opponent who did not run away. Although there were only 300 of them, they had successfully aroused Yang heir's fighting spirit. I'll give you 100 long way. Go. Yang Qindong said, casually as if he was talking about something very normal. The black cavalry moved out, under Beta Persei's lead and Ba Dao Zhang's support. A group of 102 cavalry jumped over the Amerga River and headed straight for their target. Nicholas and the other 4 also wanted to urge their horses forward, but they were stopped by Cho Wu, who was standing at the side. This made the 5 of them puzzled. Did they not need to fight? After Yang Qindong took out a large amount of salt and iron to give to his tribe, Nicholas and the other 4 had already sold their lives to the five-star army. They were even prepared to be members of the five-star army. This was the rule. After receiving benefits from others, they naturally had to work for them. Chapter 1374. The 5 of them were even prepared to die in battle. However, when Chiovi stopped them, the 5 of them realized that the 5-star army was different from other armies. They did not need them to risk their lives. Could it be that they were really helping their tribe for free? The other 4 people were led by Nikoliv. After being stopped, their gazes naturally fell on him. Let's wait and see. Nikoliv, who was also at a loss, could only say this. At the same time, he looked at the battlefield. He could not understand why the 5-star army only sent out 100 cavalry even though they had more people. What was the reason for this? Very quickly, Nikoliv had an answer. Everything that happened on the battlefield told him that there was only one reason why the 5-star army only sent out 100 cavalry. These Mongol cavalry were not worth sending out more cavalry. The black cavalry leaped over the river, and the distance between the 2 sides was getting closer and closer. When they were less than 4 li away, Ahuchi shouted, 100 cavalry on each side, charge. Ahuchi thought that he had seen through the situation, and that the enemy had sent out 100 cavalry to test the waters. This was his chance. He only needed to kill these 100 cavalry as quickly as possible and take advantage of the fact that the enemy had not reacted to the situation to kill them. Then, the situation would be settled. When he thought about how the enemy's black armor would increase his army's combat strength by at least 50%, he began to laugh maniacally. It was truly a blessing from the gods that such a good preparation was placed in front of him. There was no reason for him not to accept it. On the battlefield, the 200 Mongol cavalry shouted and made all sorts of noises. They spread out and surrounded the 100 black cavalry, although there were only 200 of them. Because their formation was too spread out, it actually gave off a strong momentum. They either went towards the left wing or the right wing. Some even went towards the middle. The sabers in their hands continuously spun as they prepared to strike. On the other hand, the 100 black cavalry soldiers also spread out, with Beta Persei, Ba Daojiang, Pengyu, and the others at the tip of the arrows. They formed groups of around a dozen people, and they tore through the air like arrows that left their bows. They headed straight for Ahuchi, who was protected by 100 Mongolian cavaliers. It was as if no matter where the wind blew, he would just go all the way. Fire! Fire! Ahuchi's face revealed a trace of panic when he saw that the incoming enemy did not care about being surrounded and instead went straight for the root of the problem. Although there were only 100 of them, for some reason, they gave him a great sense of pressure. It was like being stared at by a wild beast on a grassland. With a command, the 100 cavalrymen beside him quickly took out their strong bows, not their arrows, and began to shoot. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Arrows pierced through the air unceasingly, their target being the 100 black cavalry soldiers who were charging straight at them. At the same time, a large number of Mongolian cavaliers also surged in from the left and right of the black cavalry. It was not an exaggeration to say that there was an ambush from all sides. At that moment, the black cavalry had already met with dozens of Mongolian cavaliers in front of them. Their black clothes and black armor allowed them to ignore normal arrows. At that moment, they only needed to swing their swords and kill the enemies who were charging at them. Clang, clang, clang. The Black Knight Dragon Guards did not show any signs of slowing down, nor did they make any movements to dodge. They allowed the arrows to hit their bodies, and the sound of metal clashing could be heard. Then, the sabers in their hands clashed with the sabers of the Mongolian cavalry in front of them. Then, an unbelievable scene appeared. The Mongolian cavaliers who were riding on their horses with ferocious expressions were stunned on the spot. It was as if their acupoints had been sealed. They did not move at all, and allowed the black cavalry soldiers beside them to jump past them as if they did not know what was going on. This scene shocked Nikolaev, who was watching the battle. This scene shocked Ahuchi, who was commanding the battle. This scene shocked the Mongolian cavaliers who were flanking them from the left and right. A scene that should not have happened on the battlefield happened just like that. But everyone knew that swords and sabers had no eyes on the battlefield. Often, the outcome of a battle could be decided in an instant. There was absolutely no room for the slightest bit of absent-mindedness or carelessness because it often meant that one was already walking together with the god of death. But now, it was not just one Mongolian cavalier, but dozens of Mongolian cavaliers who were standing there. It was as if a spell had been cast on them, and they did not move at all. This scene was so real that it caused everyone who saw it to have a big question in their hearts. They could not help but ask in their hearts, "What is going on? What is going on now?" While most people were still confused, Beta Persei led the black cavalry and did not stop charging forward. They continued to charge forward bravely, and soon they reached Ahuchi's camp and stood in front of the Mongolian general. Kill! Ahuchi was also puzzled as to why his cavaliers did not move. However, with the enemy before them, he could not care so much. He clamped his legs on his horse and rode forward with his saber raised. Dang, dang, dang. When the two sides came into contact, they exchanged 3 saber blows in an extremely short period of time. Only the most elite cavaliers could achieve such a speed. Only the veterans who were one with their horses could do it so skillfully. The black cavalry slashed 3 times in a short period of time. Ahuchi and the others who were passively defending also blocked 3 saber blows. A huge force traveled down the saber to their arms, causing the arms of the 100 Mongolian cavaliers to tremble uncontrollably. Shock rose in their hearts. Not only was the speed of their opponent's saber extremely fast, the strength was also extraordinary. He was definitely a tough opponent. Before the shock in their hearts could completely disappear, an even more shocking scene appeared. After blocking the 3 slashes, they were shocked to find that the sabers in their hands had actually broken into 2. This sudden scene shocked everyone, causing them to be at a loss for what to do. They were completely shocked, just like the dozens of Mongolian riders earlier. Their minds were blank as they sat on their horses, forgetting everything. How could they have known that the black cavalry dragon guards had already changed their weapons to divine sabers? This was something that Yang Qindong had specially brought out from the military factory in Crimson City. As Yang Xie gained more and more iron ore, his forging skills continued to improve. The quality of the sabers also increased greatly. Every new divine saber lived up to its name. Not only were the sabers thinner and lighter than normal sabers, they were also sharper and had reached a state where they could cut through iron like mud. In just 3 saber blows, they were able to cut the enemy's saber in half. This showed how powerful and tough the saber was. Get down from your horses. Beta Persei and the others, who had succeeded in one strike, reined in their horses. Then they swung their arms and used the backs of their sabers to smack down on the backs of the Mongolian cavaliers who were still standing on their horses with shocked expressions. Under the powerful force, the Mongolian cavaliers who were unable to defend themselves in time fell down from their horses like dumplings. 100 Mongolian cavaliers, including Ahuchi, were all captured at the start of the fight. This sudden scene also shocked the Mongolian cavaliers who were charging over from both sides. In their eyes, Ahuchi and the others were captured the moment they came into contact with the black cavalry. How did this trick work? They really could not understand it. It was only when the dozens of Mongolian cavaliers who were fighting against the Black Knights and Dragon Guards on the battlefield suddenly shouted and ran in all directions with their broken sabers in hand that the other Mongolian cavaliers noticed that the weapons in their comrades' hands had been broken into two at some point in time. They finally figured out what had happened and why their general had been taken captive in a single encounter. The remaining 100 or so Mongolian cavaliers suddenly changed their direction of charge. They no longer fought against the Black Cavalry. Instead, they ran in all directions. A group of cavaliers dressed in black armor and equipped with spirit. They could ignore the arrows fired from afar, and also had sabers that could cut through iron like mud. This kind of opponent was not someone they could fight against. Since they could not win, they could only run. They had to report this news to the Khan. Not good, they want to run. Nikolaev instinctively shouted and immediately rode out. The scene that had just happened in front of him had stimulated him greatly in their eyes. They were invincible, and there was nothing they could not win. Wherever they appeared, it was as if a gust of wind had swept through, and not a single blade of grass grew. Once any of the Russian tribes met them, they would usually run away before the battle even started. Yet, it was precisely such a powerful existence that was unable to withstand a single blow from the Black Knight Dragon Guards. In just a single exchange, the Black Knight Dragon Guards were defeated. This was simply too unbelievable and unbelievable. After the shock, Nikolaev's eyes were filled with killing intent. The Mongolian cavaliers were defeated. Was this not the time for him to collect the blood debt? He thought about how his tribe originally had more than 1,000 people, but after being attacked by the Mongolian cavaliers time and time again, there were only a few hundred people left. How great was this hatred! Even in his dreams, he wanted to take revenge. He could only hate the fact that his strength was limited. Now that the opportunity had finally appeared, how could he let go of this chance to beat the dog in the water? Nikolaev wanted to chase after the enemy, and the 4 companions beside him did the same. However, before they could truly run out, arrows tore through the air and landed on the Mongolian cavalrymen who were trying to escape one after another or on their war horses. Tian, who appeared with 1,000 cavaliers. They had been lying in ambush for a long time in order to surround the enemy and not give anyone a chance to escape. Chapter 1375. Tian, who was very confident in the Black Cavalry, had been waiting for the moment when they would be defeated and run away. When the opportunity came, he gave the order, and the 1,000 cavalrymen under him raised their bows and shot. One after another, the Mongolian cavalrymen fell from their horses and fell to the ground. They fell so hard that they saw stars and lost their sense of direction. Rows of cavalry moved out in an orderly formation from all directions, forming a huge circle that surrounded the 300 Mongolian cavalrymen. It also made some of the Mongolian cavalrymen who had just climbed up from the ground and wanted to escape despair. Capture them all. Kill those who resist. After Tian, who was wearing a purple cape, gave the order, the elite cavalrymen under him quickly went forward and restrained the Mongolian cavalrymen, who fell to the ground one after another. After 3 Mongolian cavalrymen who wanted to resist with their blades were beheaded and blood splattered 3 feet high, the other Mongolian cavalrymen became obedient. At this moment, all of them had despair in their eyes, and they looked like the commoners who had been surrounded and killed by them. From the beginning to the end of the battle, less than 15 minutes had passed, and Beta Persei had already returned to young Chendong, reporting to young master, "In this battle, we killed 12 of the enemy and captured 288 of them. There were no casualties on our side. Please give us your orders. Clean up the battlefield and interrogate the prisoners." Yang Chendong's magnetic voice rang out. After Beta Persei gave a military salute, he handed everything to Commander Tian, who to deal with. Tian, who had been through hundreds of battles, was very familiar with these matters. He quickly came to a Heki and asked about whether there were any more Mongolian cavalrymen nearby. A Heki, who had been beaten silly, had two of his fingers mercilessly chopped off by Tian, who, he screamed and said loudly, I'll talk. In less than 10 minutes, Ahechi told him that there was another group of Mongol cavalry 100 miles away beside the Lena River. The sixth young master, he told me that there is a group of 2,000 Mongolian cavalry near the Lena River in the northeast. Their mission is to monitor this area and prevent the Far Eastern Army from breaking out. Tian, who reported as he walked in front of Yang Chendong. 2,000 cavalrymen? Yang Chendong sneered. Let's go and devour them. Anyone who dared to challenge the 5-star army was an enemy. Yang Chendong would never show mercy to his enemies, not to mention an army of foreign races. Although there were only 1,500 of them, none of them showed fear when Yang Chendong gave the order. From their point of view, it was as if their 1,500 men encircling and eating the 2,000 Mongol cavalry was a matter of course. It was so normal. He left behind a small group of 50 men to watch over Ahechi and the other 2 captives. In the blink of an eye, Yang Chendong brought the main force and disappeared from the Amuga River. Lena River. The river was flowing from a high point to a low point. Beside this 30 feet wide river, a number of tents had been set up. Many Mongolian soldiers patrolled with their sabers in hand. Piles of firewood were piled up here, and many fully dressed sheep were placed on the piles of firewood. What a lively scene! The sky was about to turn dark, and bonfires were lit. From the tents at the side, many white-skinned women in tattered clothes walked out. Under the illumination of the fire, everyone's face revealed a terrified expression. These women were all captives of the Mongolian cavalrymen, and they were all women from the nearby Russian tribes. Over the past few days, the Mongol cavalry had appeared like locusts and invaded their homes. They killed all the men in their tribe and captured them. Some of them had lost their fathers, some had lost their husbands, and some had lost their children. Their experiences had caused some of them to feel numb. If not for the fact that they did not have the courage to die, they would have followed in the footsteps of their families. However, although they did not die, they only had a body. Without a soul, without hope, they were just walking corpses. Bring them out and let them dance. If they dance well, they will have food to eat. Ha ha ha. A middle-aged man dressed in Mongolian armor laughed out loud. He was the general of the 2,000 Mongolian soldiers, Nanlidi. Ever since he had followed Hulahin from Siberia to the Far East region, he had been living a blissful life every day. In the day, he would lead the cavalrymen to sweep and kill, and at night, he would enjoy the fruits of his labor. Under his small eyes, his gaze carefully swept across the white women. He had already chosen 2 targets who would serve him to sleep tonight. Compared to the life in the Far East region, it was much better than the barren Siberia. There was good wine, beauties, and a Han Chinese army that could be taken as prey at any time. Compared to the Siberia region that they had swept through countless times, this place was simply too rich. Of course, what Nanlidi enjoyed was still a far cry from what Kanhurihin and General Akmu enjoyed. The other party had taken over the Far Eastern region's capital, Al City. There were hundreds of thousands of people from various races there, and the wealth and beauties were uncountable. Although he was envious in his heart, Nanlidi could only sigh. He knew that his experience was still shallow, and some good things would not be his turn. However, it was not that he did not have any hope. For example, if he could find the hiding place of the Far Eastern Army, it would be a great achievement. It was said that the Far East Army's provisions were hidden in a very secretive place, and only the governor knew where it was. Once he found this person, The merit he would receive would be enough to qualify him to go to All City. At that time, his treatment would undergo an earth-shattering change. And tomorrow we will send people to search nearby and expand the search area. However, for now, of course we have to enjoy it. Ha, come on, let them dance. Nan Leedy, who was full of expectations for tomorrow, seemed to be filled with yearning and hope. His entire mood seemed to have become even more excited at this moment. The general gave the order, and the women who were chased out of the house were thrown into the inner circle, and under the light of the bonfire, they started to dance the Russian folk dance. Outside, countless Mongolian cavalrymen drank the horse milk wine, ate the whole roasted lamb, and laughed with saliva dripping from their mouths. Some of their gazes were filled with lust when they looked at the scene, as if they were evil children on the grasslands staring at white lambs. The women felt their hearts palpitating, and some of the more timid ones started to cry. They could already imagine what kind of fate would befall them when night fell, thinking about how they would soon become the bedding of these evil, wolf-like people. Some of them could not help but start to sob. Everyone would be afraid. And now the Russian women were not only afraid, they had already started to feel fear. This caused their dance to become messy, and it immediately attracted the scolding of some of the Mongolian soldiers. The more nervous one was, the easier it was for them to make mistakes. Finally, one of the girls lost her composure. Especially when she was too direct with the gaze of a Mongolian soldier, she accidentally sprained her ankle and fell to the ground. "Bastard, you can't even dance properly. What's the use of having you?" One of the closest Mongolian soldiers pulled out the scimitar at his waist and walked towards the woman with a ferocious gaze. His body was filled with killing intent, and his gaze was filled with rage. He wanted to kill one as an example and let all the Russian women know that in front of the brave Mongolian soldiers, they could only listen obediently. Otherwise, only death would await them. The Mongolian soldier stood up, and the Russian women cried out in shock. They hugged each other, but they threw the woman on the ground to the side. In times of danger, the selfish side of humans was fully displayed. Although they were all prey, no one had any intention of standing up for the woman. It was better to live than to die, and this was a truth that could be easily displayed in many ways. All of the girls were trembling in fear, causing the other Mongol soldiers to laugh out loud. They loved to see their prey in fear, and it was as if that was the only way to show off their strength. The Mongolian soldier who stood up had already pulled out the scimitar on his body, and in a few steps he arrived in front of the Russian woman on the ground. What he saw was a pleading, pitiful, and helpless gaze. However, at this moment, it was as if he did not see it. In these few days, he had already killed 2 Russians, and he was no longer afraid of killing. On the contrary, he could even feel a trace of pleasure from it. Sometimes killing could be addictive, especially when the prey did not dare to resist and was at his mercy. That kind of feeling was indescribably wonderful. The Mongolian soldier raised the scimitar in his hand, and his face was filled with smiles. Then he swung the scimitar down, and he could not wait to see the woman covered in blood and struggling on the ground. The other Mongolian soldiers did not move, and it was as if they were already used to this scene. They were still waiting for the scimitar to fall, and as long as this woman died, the other Russian women would definitely be more obedient. Later on, wouldn't they be able to do whatever they wanted? And they would be at their mercy? Unknowingly, everyone's gaze landed on the Mongolian soldier, and they were waiting for what was about to happen. However, 1 breath passed, 2 breaths passed, and that scimitar did not fall. It wasn't until 3 breaths later that someone suddenly shouted, "Where did the bow and arrow come from?" Not good. Enemy attack. Under the illumination of the bonfire, an arrow with a trembling tail appeared on the back of the Mongolian soldier. At this moment, a quarter of the arrow had already entered. Previously, because of the angle, no one noticed it, but now that they saw it clearly, some of the experienced soldiers began to shout. One after another, the Mongolian soldiers who had yet to find their horses were hacked to the ground. One after another, the Mongolian soldiers who wanted to counterattack realized that the scimitars in their hands were quickly broken into two, becoming useless objects. One after another, the Mongolian soldiers fell to the ground covered in blood, their bodies trembling uncontrollably. One after another, the Mongolian soldiers watched as the enemy's scimitars slit their necks. They were powerless and helpless. It was as if they had been surrounded by the small Russian tribe. Now, they had become the prey, the meat on the fish. Those who resist will be killed without mercy. Those who surrender, throw down your weapons and kneel on the ground, and you will live. Tian, who held his scimitars, and in a short period of time, he had already cut down 3 Mongolian soldiers. He was filled with killing intent as he watched the Mongolian soldiers in front of him dwindle. Those who surrender will live. Those who resist will die. More and more 5-star army soldiers began to roar. Their voices were transmitted into the ears of the Mongolian soldiers. Some of the Mongolian soldiers who had been frightened pale by the scene in front of them finally put down their weapons. This was simply an unequal battle. One side came prepared, while the other side came unprepared. One side was preparing their troops, while the other side was immersed in wine and women. One side was filled with killing intent, while the other side was filled with fear. One side was like a hot knife through butter, while the other side was defeated like a mountain. Under such a situation, if they continued to resist, they would only die, just like those Russian girls who knew that it was hard to live, but did not want to die. These Mongolian soldiers were the same. After knowing that they could live if they surrendered, they did not hesitate to choose the latter. With a large number of Mongolian soldiers kneeling and surrendering, the situation on the battlefield became clearer. In less than an hour, the entire battle had ended. Ba, Daojiang, and Tian, who began to clean up the battlefield. The Russian girls who had been captured stood together, the Mongolian soldiers who had surrendered squatted together, and the corpses of the Mongolian soldiers who had been killed were carried together. Under the illumination of the flames, the Russian girls looked at their surroundings in panic. To them, the Mongolian soldiers had been defeated, but it did not mean that they were free. No one knew who these Mongolian soldiers were, and whether they had any other intentions. If one were to use a phrase to describe their mentality, it would be that they had just escaped from the wolf's den and entered the tiger's den. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The earth trembled once again, causing the Russian girls, who were already worried about their future, to have a drastic change in expression. Chapter 1377. With the scene of him killing the surrendered Mongol soldiers, Nanlidi immediately knelt down and did not even waste a breath of time. The soft feared the hard feared the rash, and the rash feared those who did not care about their lives. The facts proved that the ancients did not lie. The 2,000 Mongol cavalry were either killed or surrendered. After the matter was tallied, not a single one of them managed to escape. This was because Nanlidi was too careless and did not even send out a single scout. Maybe he thought that he was the king in this world, and no one dared to offend him. None of the 2,000 Mongol cavalry managed to escape, and none of the Russian girls managed to escape. The tallied result was that there were close to 400 of them. Among them, there were many women who were close to 50 years old. From this, one could see that the Mongol cavalry were a bunch of country bumpkins who wanted anyone. Along with Yang Chindong's arrival, these Russian girls were naturally released, and Nikolaev personally talked to them. Based on Yang Chindong's instructions, if they could find their own tribe, they would be given food and allowed to leave. They would also take the chance to spread the news of the five-star army's arrival and some policies that would benefit the people. On the other hand, if they had no home to return to, they could follow the five-star army to All City, which was where the far eastern province was. When they reached there, whether they remarried or started their own tribe, as long as they were willing to work hard for the five-star army, they would not starve to death. On the contrary, those who worked hard would change and live a better life. At this moment, Nikolaev was filled with absolute respect for Yang Chendong. He personally saw 1,500 five-star army soldiers deal with 2,000 Mongol cavalry like they were chopping vegetables. At this moment, he already had the thought of joining the five-star army. He placed a lot of importance on the mission that Yang Chendong gave him and wanted to complete it well. They did not rest for the entire night, and Nikolai brought his four brothers to talk to almost all the Russian women. After confirming that more than 30 of them could find their own tribe, they gave them food and allowed them to leave. There were still around 350 Russian women left in the camp, and they would be sent along with the 2,000 Mongol cavalrymen who were captured and sent to the city of Arr. The only difference was that these women were considered good citizens, while these Mongol captives had to do manual labor. In the future, they would have to repair the city walls and roads. The next morning, Yang Chendong first listened to Nicholas' report. After knowing that Nicholas had completed the task well, he gave him some encouragement. Then he saw Nanlidi, who had become very obedient after being tortured for a night. Bugnam of Gojozian, this sinner is willing to take my place. How long had it been? Tang Sheng was puzzled, but Supreme General Akmu didn't care that much. Seeing that the Great Khan was angry and that he wanted to see the corpse, he naturally agreed. He also said that he would immediately send out more scouts and expand the search area to find the remnants of the far eastern province. As a surrendered general, Tang Sheng, who had nowhere else to go, also said that he would fully cooperate with General Akmu and search for Chunbo's possible hiding places to prevent any loopholes. Both of the generals had expressed their stance, which made Houlihan reveal a satisfied expression. Then, his gaze fell on the merchant, Belinsky, wanting to see what he had to say. The real reason why Houlihan was able to conquer the far eastern state was because of this Belinsky. Belinsky grew up in a white family. Because of his parents' low status, he had never eaten a proper meal before he grew up. At that time, he had vowed that he would change everything through his own efforts. In the future, his children would not have to worry about food anymore. It was said that the children of the poor were able to take charge of the family at an early age. After Belinsky had his ambition, he worked hard for it, coupled with his talent. He slowly became a true merchant. In order to obtain more benefits, he traveled extensively and was not afraid of danger. One time, he accidentally came to the far eastern prefecture and saw a huge city standing there. At that time, regardless of whether it was Siberia or the far eastern region, they were all undeveloped and deserted. Other than the few cities where the Khans were located, one could occasionally see a tribe of 1,000 people. Those could be considered prosperous. However, there were hundreds of thousands of people from various races in Dal City. This shocked Belinsky and made him very excited. Merchants knew that as long as there were people, they could do business. These hundreds of thousands of people were equivalent to hundreds of thousands of customers, which meant that they could earn an uncountable amount of money. Chapter 1378. In his excitement, Belinsky used his business methods to understand the situation in the city, as well as the prices of the various items in the city. As his understanding of the city deepened, he was also deeply shocked by the dazzling array of goods in the city. For example, glass products, perfume, silk, tea leaves, and so on were all used here. Once these things were sold elsewhere, The benefits would be unimaginable. In his excitement, Belinsky took out all of his savings to purchase goods in all city. Gradually, he established a relationship with Tang Sheng. Under his intentional roping, the two of them quickly became friends, and he was also able to learn some secrets that no one else knew. For example, if a Han merchant were to purchase goods from Archeng, the cost would be reduced by a lot, and they would receive a lot of preferential treatment. For example, Tang Sheng actually had Mongolian blood in him, and his tribe was in the Abelia region, etc. Belinsky had always been an ambitious businessman. After learning about the situation, he had other ideas. For example, he could drive the Han people out of the Far Eastern region and let him personally control everything. That way, his strength would increase by hundreds or even thousands of times in the shortest amount of time. At that time, he would no longer need to run around doing business. At that time, his descendants would no longer have to worry about not having enough to eat. After the ambitious Belinsky left the Far Eastern region, he came to the Siberia region to look for Khan Hurahan. If he wanted to achieve his goal, he needed a powerful partner, and Hurahan was that person in his heart. Hurahan, who was also ambitious, quickly got together with Belinsky. Then they took control of Tang Sheng's tribe and used him as a spy to launch a surprise attack. Without any preparation, Chunbo was injured and fled, and the Far Eastern region changed hands. In fact, Hurahan was able to live a good life now because of the information and help provided by Belinsky. Therefore, in his heart, he still valued this merchant very much. Now, he looked at him and wanted to hear if he had any good opinions. This did not disappoint Hurahan. From the perspective of a merchant, Belinsky made a suggestion: open the city gates and let the commoners out. At the same time, offer a large reward for information on Chunbo's whereabouts. No matter who it was, what tribe they were from, or what status they had in the past, as long as they could provide information on Chunbo's whereabouts, they would be rewarded with 50,000 taels of silver. If you can capture him alive and deliver him to me, you will be rewarded with 100,000 taels of silver. Whether it was 50,000 or 100,000, it was not a small number. If they hadn't conquered Archeng, even if they sold Hurahan, they wouldn't have been able to gather so much money. But now, he had already occupied the Far Eastern state. He had plundered a lot of good things here, but he didn't have time to take away the silver. These mere tens of thousands of silver taels were nothing in his eyes. Great Khan, everyone has a greedy heart. As long as we offer a large enough reward, no one will not be tempted. Once the news spreads, we don't have to worry about Chunbo not showing up, Belinsky said confidently. This came from his understanding of human nature. In this world, no one didn't like money. All they had to do was provide information, and they could get 50,000 taels of silver. They wouldn't be able to finish eating and drinking for the rest of their lives. Who wouldn't be tempted? The so-called loyalty was only because the bargaining chip for betrayal wasn't enough. Now that Belinsky had raised this bargaining chip and was satisfied, anyone with a weak will would know what decision to make. Good, very good. Hu Lihan was overjoyed when he heard that. He just wanted to find Chunbo and use him to find the 1,000,000 dan of grain. He didn't care about the process. A huge net was set up to find Chunbo. At this time, Chunbo didn't know that someone had put a bounty on his head. He didn't even know that Yang Chindong had led the army into the Far East. At this time, he was suffering from a fever in a forest 50 miles east of Archeng, enduring a life and death crisis. It's still not working. He's still burning. The captain of the guards, Xia Qian, said worriedly after removing his hand from Chunbo's forehead, "If it doesn't work, then boil some water." The commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division, Kong He, clenched and unclenched his right fist. He seemed to have made a decision. Tang Sheng's sudden attack had caught Chunbo off guard. He had been stabbed while running away. Fortunately, the Far Eastern Army had a complete set of traditional Chinese medicine, so a knife wound wasn't fatal. However, Chen Bo hadn't had a good rest. His wound had become infected while he was running, causing him to have a high fever. Although the wound was no longer inflamed, if the fever didn't subside, his life would still be in danger. Scalding one's feet with hot water was a good way to get rid of the fever. Everyone who studied under Yang Xuan knew this. However, the problem was that they were in a state of hibernation. They couldn't boil water and smoke to attract attention. If Chen Bo woke up, he would never allow such a thing to happen. However, this was a matter of life and death. When Chen Bo wasn't awake, Commander Kong, he took his position and gave this order. Okay, let's be careful. The captain of the guards, Xia Qian, nodded and ordered someone to make the arrangements. He himself didn't leave Chen Bo's side at all times. He even had a short knife with him. Following Tang Sheng's rebellion, it was hard for Xia Qian to trust anyone. Speaking of which, it was precisely because of Tang Sheng's rebellion that Chen Bo became vigilant. He firmly grasped the military power in his hands and gave the order when he was running away. Without his military order and tiger tally, even the three commanders couldn't mobilize the soldiers of the Far Eastern Army. As a result, the counterattack couldn't be carried out and the three divisions could only find a place to hide. If he wanted to turn the situation around, the first thing he had to do was to wake Chen Bo up. In order to achieve this goal, Xia Qian didn't care whether he would be discovered or not, since no matter what he did, it would be contradictory. He would just choose the lesser of two evils. They naturally didn't lack firewood in the mountains. The only problem was that once they did this, smoke would inevitably be produced. This was a dangerous thing that could easily expose their location. As a result, even though the guards were extremely careful, there was still smoke coming out of the forest. It was spotted by the Mongolian scouts who were searching nearby. However, due to the distance, he couldn't immediately go forward to investigate. After thinking for a moment, he turned his horse around and rushed towards a nearby Mongolian army. Just as this Mongolian scout was about to leave, there was another cavalry scout about 8 li away who also saw this scene and left. The hot water was finally boiled. The unconscious Chen Bo was supported by Xia Qian as he placed his feet into the tub of hot water. With a cry, Chen Bo woke up from the hot water and slowly fainted again. Fortunately, after soaking in the hot water, his body began to sweat. After 2 hours, his body temperature began to drop, and Chen Bo woke up again. With the fever temporarily gone, Chen Bo's spirit seemed to be much better. With Xia Qian's support, he forced himself to sit up. He first looked at the tub that was still warm and frowned. "Guys started a fire?" "Yes, it was my order." The 2nd Cavalry Division's commander, Kong He, took a step forward and took responsibility. Beside him, Commander Xia Qian also followed up and said, "I also agree." AI. Hearing that they had started a fire, Chen Bo sighed. At this moment, he didn't know what to say. However, since the fire had already started, it was too late to say anything. He could only hope that no one would discover them. "All right, let's not talk about this matter. This place could be exposed at any moment. We need to leave this place immediately and look for another safe place. Commander, the 2nd Cavalry Division is nearby. Should we gather with them?" Knowing that the commander would make such an arrangement, Division Commander Kong, he volunteered. "No." Chen Bo shook his head and said decisively, "We are in danger at any moment. Tang Sheng has rebelled. No one knows if there are any spies in the army. For the safety of the army, we cannot take the initiative to contact anyone. A person couldn't fall in the same place twice." Chen Bo's method was understandable. Although it was a little passive, it was better in terms of safety. After the other 3 divisions went into martial law, it could indeed ensure their safety to the greatest extent. However, this way, the military would be in danger. It's fine. With our guard division, we will protect the general's safety even if we have to risk our lives. As the commander, Xia Qian had a determined expression. Although the guard division had suffered heavy losses on the way out of Alair City, there were less than 200 people left from the original 2,000 people. However, even if there was only one person left, they had to arrange for the general to be sent out. Good. Hearing Xia Qian's attitude, Chun Bo patted the back of his hand in satisfaction. Then, his face was covered by a layer of worry. Sigh, it's a pity that our radio is broken and we can't contact the outside world. The situation here can't be spread out in time. I think the 6th young master must be worried sick. Chun Bo temporarily regained consciousness. However, it didn't eliminate the possibility of him having a high fever at any moment. After all, the hot water treatment didn't solve the problem. Without a safe environment to rest, the fever could reappear at any moment. Using this time, the guard division made the decision to move. However, just as everyone was packing up and Chun Bo was being carried onto a military stretcher, a soldier hurriedly came to report that there was a large group of Mongolian cavalry outside the mountain. There were at least 1,000 of them. They found us so quickly, whether it was Kong He or Xia Qian, their faces sank. Chapter 1379. Maybe this is fate. How about this? You guys go first, and I'll cover you. Remember, no one can have the right to mobilize the army without an order. If I die, then wait for the 6th young master to send a new commander to give the order. In comparison, Chun Bo's expression was calmer, as if everything that happened was not out of his expectations. No, if we're leaving, we'll leave together. Xia Qian and Kong, he said, almost at the same time. As the captain of the guards, protecting Chun Bo was his most important task. Once the commander was in trouble, he would naturally not be able to avoid punishment. It was understandable that he would say such words. However, Kong He was the commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division, so he did not need to do this. However, Kong He still made such a decision. When Chun Bo heard it, he could not help but sigh. He could understand Kong. He was originally the commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division, but because he was worried about his illness, he took the initiative to leave the division. Now, it was not impossible for him to return to the division, but after he returned, he would probably only be able to hide in the dark and would not be able to mobilize the army. After Tang Sheng's rebellion, without Chun Bo's orders, even the commander could not mobilize the army. He felt that this commander had no authority. Instead of going back to hide, he might as well kill the enemy here and leave his life or death to the heavens. In fact, Chun Bo used to trust Commander Kong. He very much. Otherwise, he would not have arranged for him to guard the nest in the far eastern region when he sent troops to rescue Beginning City. However, since there was a problem with Tang Sheng as the commander, he had given the order that the army should not move without orders, so he had to treat everyone equally. Sighing, Chun Bo knew that it was impossible to chase the 2 of them away. He could only speak while he was still conscious. Since that's the case, let's move to a safe place now. Let's go. After Xia Qian agreed, he ordered the guards to speed up. At the same time, he sent out scouts to scout the enemy's situation. He wanted to find an opening where the enemy was weak to charge out. There were 1,000 Mongolian cavalrymen surrounding this area. They were quite lucky and were patrolling this area. When they heard the report from the scouts, they rushed over with the intention of giving it a try. Unexpectedly, they really bumped into a big fish. Although he wasn't sure if the person who was surrounded was a general from the far eastern region, it was already a great achievement that he was able to fight back. The Mongolian general's eyes glowed with excitement as he said, "Don't be in a rush to attack. We need to surround them before we attack. In any case, we cannot let a single person escape." It had to be said that these Mongol cavalry were quite strong. After roaming the Siberian region for many years, they had unique experience in fighting cavalry in mountainous regions. In this aspect, even the five-star army that had been through hundreds of battles would not be their match. This was also the main reason why Yang Qindong did not immediately head for Arching, but instead set up an ambush beside the Amuga River. It was because they were good at fighting in the mountains that the 1,000 Mongolian cavalrymen did not take the Far Eastern Army seriously. In their eyes, the Far Eastern Army was just a defeated opponent. Therefore, after the order was given, they did not rush to surround the Far Eastern Army. This made Xia Qian and the others, who were in the middle of the encirclement, very anxious. They were already prepared to fight back with all their might when the enemy charged at them. They were also prepared to look for a weak point to break out of the encirclement. However, the enemy did not panic and continued to shrink the encirclement. In this way, it would be hard to say if there was a weak point. They are still not in a rush to charge. We have to make the first move. Xia Qian was not a stubborn person. Otherwise, he would not have become the captain of the guards. After thinking deeply, he made a decision. He wanted to counterattack first and see if he could disrupt the enemy's formation and find a way to break out of the encirclement. "Let me go. You have to stay behind and ensure the safety of the general. This is the most important thing." Kang He stood up again and made his decision to lead the troops. "No, this is my responsibility as the captain of the guards. How can I let Mr. Kang take the risk?" Xia Qian shook his head and said, "What do you mean by taking the risk? Do you think we will be safe if we stay here?" Kang He did not back down. Obviously, the two of them saw the danger in front of them. Instead of sitting here and waiting for death, they might as well charge out and fight the enemy to their heart's content. At least they could kill a few enemies. The two of them were still arguing. Neither of them had the intention to back down. On the outside, the Mongolian cavalrymen were getting closer and closer to them. The encirclement was also shrinking. It looked like the battle would start at any moment. However, they did not know that behind them, there was a group of cavalrymen quickly gathering and closing in on them. They were the vanguard that Yang Qindong sent out. They were the vanguard led by Dai Qua, the former commander of the Far Eastern Army's 1st Cavalry Division. Considering that Dai Qua was familiar with the situation here, Yang Qindong sent him out to see if he could find Chun Bo's position. When the time was right, he would coordinate with him from the inside. Based on his understanding of the military commander, Dai Qua searched a few places but did not find anything. When he once again marked out a region and wanted to continue searching, a scout reported that he saw smoke floating out from the mountains. He immediately brought a group of cavalrymen and rushed over. Considering that the information had not been confirmed, and he was not sure if this was the location of the Far Eastern Army, Dai Qua did not increase his speed. He was very careful to avoid being discovered by the Mongolian scouts. It was only when the scout at the front reported that they found many Mongolian cavalrymen outside the mountain and that they were moving forward that Dai Qua disregarded everything and rushed over. Since the Mongolian cavalrymen were moving, there must be a target here. Wouldn't their target be the Far Eastern Army that he was looking for? Thinking that he was finally going to find the missing army, Dai Qua was a little excited. He could not help but increase the speed of his army. One side was moving at full speed, while the other side was slowly encircling. With one increasing and one decreasing, the distance between the two sides was quickly closing. A huge battle was brewing in the forest. Reporting, a large number of unknown cavalrymen have appeared behind us. The Mongolian scouts were not incompetent. Dai Qua's actions behind them finally attracted their attention. At this moment, the distance between the two sides was less than 10 li, 20 li of open land and 10 li of forest. This was the distance that the scouts usually patrolled. When the Mongolian general Ulu heard the news, he was not worried but happy. Didn't this prove that they had caught a big fish? Otherwise, why would so many enemy cavalrymen appear? Can you see how many people there are? Ulu's voice carried a trace of excitement and agitation as he asked. There are too many trees, so I can't be sure. However, there should be no less than 1,000 people. The scout first shook his head and then thought carefully before explaining. Okay. Hearing that there were no less than 1,000 people, Ulu was even more delighted. If there were too many enemies, he might have to consider whether or not he had the strength to fight. However, if they were on the same level as him, he had nothing to worry about. With the same number of soldiers, his cavalrymen were better at fighting in the mountains. He was confident that he could deal a heavy blow to the enemy. Send down the order. Apart from leaving 200 men to keep an eye on the target in the mountains, everyone else get ready to charge. Ulu decided to take down this group of enemy cavalrymen. In order to obtain the merit, he did not have the intention to report it to his superiors. This caused him to lose the last chance to kill Chinbo. After the 1,000 Mongolian cavalrymen received the order, they continued to advance slowly on the surface, shrinking the encirclement. However, they were secretly prepared to turn around and fight at any moment. Dai Qua, who was quickly approaching from behind, did not notice this. He did not care who was surrounded. Based on the principle that an enemy of an enemy was a friend, he had to save them. As for whether or not he could defeat them, he was still confident. He was once a member of the Far Eastern Army, so Dai Qua naturally knew about the strength of some Mongolian cavalrymen. Because the enemy had lived here since young, they were used to fighting in the mountains. If it was a one-on-one, he did not have much confidence. However, the scouts had reported that the enemy only had 1,000 cavalrymen. In terms of numbers, he had twice the enemy's. Furthermore, he had led the army through the baptism of war. Many of the soldiers were not veterans, but they had been through life and death situations. With double the number advantage, he was confident that he could defeat the enemy. Both sides had their own plans, and the distance between them was getting closer and closer. 10 miles, 8 miles, 6 miles. When they were only 3 miles away, they could hear the sound of horse hooves in the forest. The 800 Mongolian cavalrymen who were already prepared started to counterattack. They suddenly turned their horses around. As they ran back, they took out their bows. Charge, kill them all. Dai Qua took the lead and rushed to the front. When he vaguely saw the shadows of many enemies flashing from behind some trees, he didn't hold back and shouted loudly. When enemies meet on a narrow path, the brave will win. In the dense forest, the speed of the warhorse was not much of an advantage. Whoever was braver and more courageous would naturally have the advantage. There was no need for anyone to give any orders. When the distance between the two sides was less than an arrow's distance, many bows and arrows were shot from all directions towards the approaching 5-star army's cavalry. Ding, ding, dang, dang. The sound of arrows clashing with cavalry swords could be heard. The 5-star army soldiers did not show any signs of fear and continued to charge forward. Even though along the way some of their soldiers were shot off their horses and some even died from the arrows, this did not stop them from advancing. The 5-star army's rules were very strict. When the general gave the order, even if there was a mountain of blades and a sea of flames in front of them, as long as there was no order to stop, they were not allowed to take a step back. You're tuning into the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.